Okay, so welcome everyone to tonight's class. No matter if you're watching live or if you're watching this in a recorded time at a later date, I'm very happy to have you here with us. So we're going to have a conversation about porn. I will probably tell you this multiple times, but this was a very difficult class to put together because of the sensitivity of the subject matter. I wanted to make sure that I addressed all of the points that I thought really needed to be heard about this subject, while also remaining very sensitive to everyone's own feelings and experiences around the topic of pornography. So let's get started. First of all, I'm going to introduce myself. If you have followed me on social media, you're probably familiar. My name is Erica, and I'm a sex educator. I've been working in the field for over 20 years now, and lately my work has been focused on providing sex education for people who were raised in conservative religions or purity culture. Our guest educator, Siri Dahl, is going to be here in about an hour and 15 minutes. So if you are here for her, you have to listen to me talk for an hour and 15 minutes before she shows up. Jasmine, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I am Jasmine, Erica's longtime friend, colleague, and a licensed social worker in the state of Pennsylvania, working as a social worker for 20 years.
And I want to add that Jasmine moderates most of my classes these days. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking about today that she and I both have a lot of personal experience in is the topic of sex trafficking. That is something that cannot be divided from the topic of pornography. And we both have the experience of having worked together with young people who were involved in the juvenile justice system, who were sex workers and or victims of trafficking. So that is definitely going to come up. I would like to set the tone first, and this is something I do in every single class I teach, but I feel like it's especially important in a class where we're going to be talking about pornography. I know that this topic is very touchy, to say the least. It draws on really deep-seated fears that people have, very strong emotions that people have. It ties in morality and religion and exploitation and feminism and so many different things. There are just so many different things that come up when we talk about pornography. So I want to acknowledge that I am well aware of that. And I know that there are probably folks taking this class who have had bad experiences with this topic or with people's use of pornography. So I wanted you to know that I acknowledge that, and I want all of us to sort of just take a deep breath. We are here to learn some things together, and it's okay if you feel uncomfortable or challenged by the subject matter. I imagine you will. I think that's probably always a sign that some learning is happening. I learned a lot while putting this class together. I was telling Jasmine before y'all signed on that most of the time when I do classes, a lot of the information that I put out there, I just kind of have known from my work. But researching the topic of pornography, I was reading scientific studies, I was reading books, I was really trying to get as much good information as I could. So there's a lot here today. Please feel free to interact in the chat. One of the best things about my classes is the way that folks interact in the chat with each other. I'm sure some of you are here. Some of you have probably been in my classes before. So feel free to talk while people are here. Like, just say hi in the chat right now. Tell me if you've been to a class before. Tell me where you're here from. Oh, you know what? I don't think I was allowing everyone to chat. I just changed the settings. So I apologize. I definitely want people to interact. So please feel free to talk to each other, to say hi. As of now, everyone can do that. And when you have questions, please only ask your questions in the Q&A box. That is something that will allow Jasmine to be able to curate your messages. If you ask questions in the chat, it's highly likely that I will not see everything. So, you know what? I don't know if I still have given everyone the ability to chat. Is that not? Oh, it's disabled for people. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just getting feedback saying the same thing I was going to tell
Okay.
you.
I apologize for that. I have never had that happen before. Let me see if I can figure out how to give everyone attendees can chat with everyone. Okay, that should have fixed it. If that has fixed it for you, please say something. There you go. Hi, everyone. This makes me happy. I need the interaction in order to know that class is going well. I don't want to just be talking to dead air. So thank you so much for speaking up and being active. And again, feel free to talk to each other. Feel free to talk to me and Jasmine. And when Siri comes on, we'll be talking to her too. I really, really love the interaction that we have in the chat. And I put this last point here, even though I don't think it's going to be a problem, because the folks that take my classes you all tend to be very lovely people that are really here to learn, and you're very excited about the subject matter. So I don't anticipate disrespect for our educator, but I do just want to put that out there, because I know for anyone who's a sex worker, that is something to just kind of set some boundaries around. Okay. So here's my goal for this class, and you might have seen this being said on social media already, but I want to give you some history, an overview of current scientific research, an inside look at the porn industry, which will come from Siri, tips to help you navigate porn conversations in your life, and also media literacy as it relates to porn. But you get to make up your own mind how you feel about it. This is not a class that is like, all right, I want all of you to go watch porn and go enjoy porn and add it to your life. That's not my business, whether you do or not, but I want you to have some different information than you've been exposed to. And a few caveats here. This class cannot be entirely comprehensive. There are folks that teach whole semesters in universities about porn, and I wish I could, because I have so much information for you. My biggest barrier as an educator is always getting everything I want to tell you and condensing it down into the important stuff. So, I mean, I could have done a 12-hour class on porn, but I'm trying really hard to squeeze the important stuff in. So if you're like, well, I wish Erica would have talked about this, I probably wish I would have talked about it too. Again, this class isn't intended to make you enjoy porn. And we are also not in denial that porn can cause harm. It can cause harm to the people who make it. It can cause harm to people who view it. We are not debating those things. I'm also not going to show you any explicit or hardcore material. When I first made this list, I wrote, I'm not going to show you any porn, but then I quickly realized that the definition of porn is very subjective, and there are folks that consider the Victoria's Secret catalog porn. So I can't say I'm not going to show you any porn, but I can say I'm not going to show you any explicit or hardcore material or any videos of any kind. I'm also not going to talk badly about the folks that appear in pornography. And I want to state that I'm an educator. I'm not a therapist. I'm not your therapist, certainly. So none of this is intended as like a diagnosis of any personal or relationship issues. And when we get to the scientific studies, again, as an educator, I'm telling you about the studies and the results of the studies. But if you have more in-depth questions about the science behind them, I'm not the person that has those answers. Let's start with the definition. Pornography is depictions of sex or bodies that are meant to sexually arouse the viewer, and that can happen through a variety of mediums, whether it's print or movie, sometimes even the written word. What may be porn to one person may mean nothing at all to someone else, or land as like actual hate speech to another. Again, the definition of pornography is not a hard and fast thing. It is not something that like we can all agree on. For example, a very famous quote from the Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart in 1964, famous quote on the definition of pornography. He said, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I know it when I see it. So our Supreme Court justices have always been on some shit, apparently. But this is a very famous quote. And it really speaks to the fact that like, that's the thing. Like, I don't know if what I see and consider porn, everyone considers porn. Yeah. Also, when it comes to the difference between porn and erotica, this is something that folks want to know too. And the answer is there isn't a good answer. In general, people tend to consider erotica softer. Maybe it's less hardcore. Maybe there's a bit of a storyline to it. But again, it is all in the eye of the beholder, much like all types of art. There is not a legal definition of erotica. There is not an official definition that differs it from porn in any way. So the debate continues. The debate's been going on for decades, and it probably always will continue. According to a historian who wrote the book, The Invention of Pornography, porn contains 3 particular elements. Number 1, it's a written or visual representation of sexual body parts or sexualized behavior. Number 2, it's an intentional violation of widely accepted moral and social taboo. And number 3, it's intended to make us feel sexually aroused. So again, I couldn't say I didn't show you any porn, because this pinup girl here was absolutely considered pornographic to some, even though to us it might be like, oh, it's very mild, she's fully clothed, but depending on whose definition. What's fascinating to me is that there has always been depictions of sex and nude bodies and sexual behavior in culture, in art, in music, in artifacts, in poetry since ancient man. And we're talking 2.6 million years ago, during the Paleolithic era. There are cave paintings of people in sexual situations. Some of the examples I have listed here, and the picture down on the bottom is the erotic papyrus from Egypt, 1,000 years BC. You can see some very explicit sexual activity. There are some penises going inside other people. Those were on, that is long, long ago. This is not new. But what is so interesting is that this stuff was made in cultures where sex and nudity wasn't so taboo. All of this art that you just saw, it might be arousing and pretty explicit, but it was created in cultures where nudity and sexuality were actually celebrated and even spiritual. And we consider that stuff now pretty taboo, embarrassing, and shameful. And you want to know why? Because of the rise of Christianity. So porn, according to the definition that includes, has to be an intentional violation of widely accepted social and moral taboos, didn't actually exist until the 1600s, which was like many, many years after that erotic papyrus you just saw. And it coincides with the rise of Christianity as a growing cultural influence on how we view nudity and sexuality. Here are some highlights about the early days of pornography. So the Catholic Church started to notice there was a lot of naked and explicit art during the Renaissance period, and they did not always like that. There was actually a list of things that Catholics should never look at, a list of like literature that they didn't change until, I believe, the 1960s. By the 1700s, the printing press came along, and that meant that you can print erotic novels. And one of the famous folks who did this was the Marquis de Sade, a French writer, and that's where the word sadism comes from. Very interesting and very divisive figure. I would very much encourage you to look up the Marquis de Sade. The photo that you see on the top where somebody is definitely looking at someone's butt with a magnifying glass, that is a Marquis de Sade print. In the 1800s, we had steam power, and that made printing things even faster. And that meant printing more porn, including graphic gay male literature, some of which I read while I was researching this class. And it is just as explicit as the things that you would imagine people are saying on Grindr right now. During this time, we also had a rise of concern about the effects of this erotic literature on the population. People, mostly church and upper class people started to say that masturbation would have detrimental effects on the population. This is where the information came out that masturbation would make you sick, insane, and blind. And the people at the top of the economic ladder worried about people on the bottom of the economic ladder having access to porn because they thought it would make working people less productive. They didn't want you masturbating. They didn't want you reading erotic novels because then maybe you wouldn't work as hard to make money for the people on top. Interesting. I learned this in grad school, and it's a fact that I've never gotten over, but every single time that technology has advanced in some way, people have immediately used it for sexual communication. So we're talking the printing press. People were printing off sexy stories. The first photographs, the daguerreotype, the internet, virtual reality. Everyone uses media to create some kind of sexually explicit content. Even telegraphs, those messages that people used to send that would be like, I am in London, stop. You know what I mean? Like, people would send dirty telegraphs to each other. The telephone, I mean, we remember, some of you remember, depending on your age, obscene phone calls, or you remember 1-900 sex lines. Like, people are sexual, people are horny, people use whatever medium is available to create content to arouse. The photos you're seeing down here are actually from one of the earliest pornographic films. Hilariously described in literature that I read, it said something like, it depicts a middle-aged man and a very stoic middle-aged woman. Those are the people on the outside here. When I was in grad school studying sexuality, I went to the Museum of Sex in Prague, and I watched a very early pornographic film. It was a silent film, and it was fascinating. It just really gives you a glimpse into what the culture was at the time, and like what the body types were and how people groomed their physical hair and all that stuff. So porn is not new. Some more facts about early pornography. The earliest surviving porn film that we know of can be accurately dated to 1908, again, would be a silent film. Porn started to become more explicit. The movies became more explicit, showing actual like penetrative sex acts between 1907 and 1915. But like, as you can imagine, seeing porn wasn't that easy back then. There weren't home videos, certainly. So one of the things that started happening in the early 20th century, so like early 1900s till about the 1960s, was something called stag films. And stag films were like sexy films. The still on the top left with that woman in bed with the garters, that's from a stag film. It was just like, you know, there'd be naked ladies, sometimes in sexual positions, sometimes rolling around. A lot of burlesque was in stag films. And you could only see that stuff like in private gentlemen's clubs at your fraternity, a bunch of guys who get together and they're, you know, I'm imagining like professional organizations like where men bro down. That's where you could see stag films because they were illegal. There were also like peep shows that you could go to, which the coins that you're seeing here are coins from some peep show booths. There's been a lot of sex trade and the selling of pornography historically in Times Square in like the 1970s. And that's where some of this stuff was happening. And then, of course, we have the rise of pornographic magazines. The first big one being Playboy. And Playboy was meant as a lifestyle magazine for gentlemen. The naked women were only part of it. I mean, it was kind of like that magazine was, Hugh Hefner wanted it to be a very classy thing for classy men. And then Penthouse came along, and the difference between Playboy and Penthouse is that Penthouse showed pubic hair and Playboy didn't. And so Penthouse was more risque. And then Hustler is another big one. Hustler was more risque than all of them. That's the one that upset people the most. They showed very explicit sex acts. They showed interracial sex. The publisher of Hustler, very controversial man named Larry Flynt. Larry Flynt did a lot of things that were incredibly degrading to women, but Larry Flynt also did a lot of things that were big victories for free speech. So he is a super divisive figure. There's a wonderful movie from the 90s called The People versus Larry Flynt, where Woody Harrelson plays Larry Flynt. And it's about his rise, but it's also about how Jerry Falwell Sr., who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, actually sued Hustler because Jerry Falwell and the religious right, they really hated pornography. And so Hustler constantly made fun of him in the pages of that magazine. And that led to a big court case. Then we have what I think is so fascinating, the golden era of pornography. It's called this, and sometimes people call it porn chic. In the 1970s, there were big production value theatrically released feature films. And Debbie Does Dallas was one, Deep Throat is another. The people that were in this movie became household names. Linda Lovelace was the woman who was in Deep Throat. Bambi Woods is the woman who was in Debbie Does Dallas. These movies were at movie theaters. My mom told me before, we were driving through my hometown one day and she's like, yeah, where that bowling alley is, it used to be a drive-in and sometimes they showed porn. And I'm just like, and my mom is in her, she was a teenager in the 70s. So she remembers that. It was actually a popular thing for like Hollywood stars to go to porn movies in the theater. And it was like a big part of culture. Fascinating, fascinating time. Not without debate though. So during this time period when porn got really big in the mainstream, feminists were very divided about it. So something happened culturally among feminists that historians refer to as the feminist sex wars or the porn wars. And we started seeing two main groups of feminists, one who were very against pornography and others who considered themselves pro-sex feminists. Now, the feminists who were very against pornography also tended to be against sex work, saying that you couldn't be a consensual sex worker. Many of them were very against trans women in lesbian spaces. Many of them were very against BDSM. Some notable anti-porn feminists at the time were Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon. They actually tried to get some laws passed and succeeded at getting some laws passed in Minneapolis and I think Indianapolis, where people could sue pornographers under civil rights laws, saying that it was like misogynist. Those laws didn't last very long because they were challenged, but it was so divisive in the feminist movement. And this is when the second wave of feminism was happening. We're talking the Equal Rights Amendment, big things in the 1970s. And their stance was very well summed up by another feminist, Robin Morgan, who said, to this particular group of people, pornography is the theory and rape is the practice. So they were essentially linking violence against women to pornography and saying that people who viewed it were going to be violent towards women. Interestingly enough, the anti-porn feminists, they hooked up with Jerry Falwell and the moral majority and the religious right to work against pornography. And a similar thing is happening now around the topic of transgender women. There are some anti-trans radical feminists who will work with the religious right and on that topic. Other side of the feminist coin were sex positive feminists who viewed the anti-porn feminists as Puritans, a threat to free speech, said they were being, moral authoritarianists, and they wanted sexual liberation to be a feminist goal. And they wanted to say, like, if I want to fuck a man, that's not me oppressing myself. And if I want to have violent according to who, if I want to have rough sex, if I want to do BDSM, if I want to tie my girlfriend up and whip her, that is my right as a woman who gets to make her own sexual decisions. So the feminist sex wars, big event, lots to know about that I cannot get into in this class, but if that kind of thing interests you, I would encourage you to read more about that time. So what happened next in the culture is more technological advances. So in about 1980, VCRs came around and people started to have them in their homes. And if you're old enough, you remember how gigantic and expensive and bulky they were. Video cameras also became something that more and more people had access to, those giant video cameras that you put on your shoulder, And VHS cassettes meant video rental. That meant you could have pornographic films in the privacy of your own home. And porn channels were on television, on the premium channel, sometimes late at night. There was a Playboy channel. There was the Spice channel, which I've told some anecdotal stories about in my Instagram. And then finally, the internet happened and there was internet porn, and social media has happened and we can upload porn of our own. So I cannot overstate the technological advances that have allowed us to have pornography at our fingertips. And I tell stories about how, you know, growing up when I was a kid and a teenager, if you wanted to see porn, you found someone's magazine, or you got someone 18 to rent one for you, or maybe you found someone's, you know, older brother's video hiding in a closet. But it was not as available to my generation as it is to young people now, which is a major concern. That's absolutely one of the biggest concerns for people, is how available pornography is. Excuse me while I let my dog out of this room. So we're not here to debate that porn is incredibly powerful in our society. It's interesting because the content of porn reflects the culture around us, just like any other form of art, literature, or media. We live in a misogynist culture. Porn has misogyny in it. We live in a white supremacist culture. There is racism in porn, in the porn industry. This is not a topic that's up for debate. But I think it's important to note that, like, by thinking about what is in porn and who's making porn and the messages we get from porn, like, it's an interesting study in our culture. The statistic I put here at the bottom is just to show you how powerful porn can be. So there was a day last fall that some popular apps like Instagram and Facebook were down, and Pornhub's traffic increased by 500,000 users during each hour that Facebook was down. Pornhub keeps very, very meticulous statistics about its user, you know, the people using the site and what kind of things they look at. So yeah, that to me says that people sometimes turn to porn when they're bored, which is a thing we'll talk about. Some more statistics about just how many people can and do access porn now that it is so widely available. Pornhub boasts 42 billion individual visitors, averaging more than 115 million visits per day. That was their statistics just a few years ago. Not Pornhub studies, but some academic studies showed that 46% of United States men and 16% of women, when asked, had viewed porn in the last week. And a study that came out in 2020 said that 68% of adolescents report exposure to online pornography. And I want to make this clear. Jasmine and I both work in adolescent medicine, and adolescence medically is considered up to age 24. So I do not know, but this statistic, if they're talking about 17 to 24-year-olds, or if they're talking about kids younger. So keep in mind the word adolescent is a range of ages, maybe anywhere from 12 to 24. So let's talk about why people look at porn. If people have been looking at porn since the 1600s, like, why do we keep doing that? What's the deal? The number one reason when studied is that porn is an aid for masturbation. I chose this ridiculous photo. It was in the stock photos, and I was like, it's too funny. I have to put it in there. This man about to eat a messy banana in front of his computer. Other reasons people look at porn: to become aroused, to be entertained, to be distracted. That statistic from Pornhub that said their traffic rose when the internet was down on Facebook and Instagram, I'm like, yeah, that's people sitting at work who are usually messing around on Facebook and Instagram to distract from life, and that's not available, so they turn to Pornhub. Because it feels good to be in a state of sexual excitement, for curiosity, sometimes for education. Evolutionary psychologists have theorized that, you know, men have evolved to need to, like, have sex with as many women as possible to perpetuate the species. And so in modern times, in the absence of doing that, they're still interested in looking at as many women or thinking about as many women sexually as possible. That's just a theory. And also sometimes people watch it to share an erotic experience with a partner. People will watch it because they want to enjoy it with someone they're having sex with, to, you know, get new ideas, to get aroused together. It can be a novelty. Porn both is a fantasy and assists us with fantasies. And also something that evolutionary psychologists theory is that sexual fantasy is an adaptation that humans have made, because that if we are fantasizing, we're more likely to be aroused. If we're aroused, we're more likely to actually have sex and therefore reproduce the species. So it is believed that having fantasies is a evolutionary adaptation, that's why we do it. This is a fantastic quote from someone who is the director of education and research training at the Kinsey Institute. Kinsey Institute is a very important sexuality research place. And I love this quote, so I just put it in verbatim. We know little about why something may turn on one person, but not another. We know little about how people develop preferences for specific kinds of sexual stimuli, or why it is that the same fantasies or images can arouse some over and over again, while other people need something new every time. And we know little about why some like or develop a liking for more extreme forms of porn. And this is a scientist at the Kinsey Institute saying this. And I point that out because there are people who will say, well, if you watch internet porn, you're going to need more and more hardcore stuff over time. And we do not have any hard science backing that up. Pornhub statistics that I think are very interesting. They keep track of where people are searching for what terms. And this is the 2021 year in review Pornhub statistics. I'm using them not because Pornhub is, a website that I'm endorsing, but because they do keep great insight about what people are into. And Pornhub isn't the only porn website out there, but it's basically like the Amazon of porn. It's the biggest. So I love how folks in, God, I'm not good at geography, above Oklahoma, above Kansas. Is that Nebraska? They're into moaning. I truly love how in Louisiana, they look up naked women. Penis pump in North Carolina. Yeah, so just a glimpse at the kind of things folks are looking for. If you look at Utah, you will see Mormon is a big search term. Here are some other statistics for your perusal, categories of porn that were most popular in 2021. Now, I think it's important, let's take a look at the one on the right here, or the left here, with the most viewed categories of 2021. We talk about how porn can objectify certain racial groups, ethnic groups, sexual minorities, and you do see that in some of these porn categories. Japanese, transgender. And I don't know if that means that trans folks were looking for porn that represents them, or people were looking for porn that fetishizes trans folks. Not sure about that. On the right side of my screen, I think it's very interesting to see the things that were viewed by women more than men. And I know that's very binary. Pornhub statistics are binary. So the things that women viewed tend to be things that provide more sexual arousal to women and people with vulvas, like scissoring, pussy licking, fingering, lesbian. Like, we're viewing that stuff more because that's the stuff that shows our pleasure. If you were interested in more statistics, I have so many resources for you that I'll send you after this class. But this is just a snapshot of some of the year-end statistics. There are plenty more that I think are super interesting. Women in porn consumption. Google Analytics showed that women are 32% of the audience for Pornhub. And again, I will mention Pornhub many times, not because I'm endorsing it, but because it does give us a great snapshot of who is looking at what. And another study showed that 45% of women say they watch porn with their partners and 32% with themselves. And the reasons that women watch porn, by and large, are for masturbation, for us to aid in masturbation because it's arousing and it feels good. I want to be very clear about this slide here. I'm about to get into some research that is contradictory to a lot of things that we have all been taught about porn, but I don't want anyone to leave this class saying Erica Smith advocates for porn without any caveats and she thinks it's great. That is not true. I'm going on the record to say I understand and am fully aware that there are many problematic things that are true about pornography viewing and about the industry. Here are all the things that I want to go on record saying that I believe are true and that I know are true. And I ran this by our friend Siri, who's coming in to talk about the industry. There can be exploitation within the industry, and historically there has been. People have been harmed in the creation of porn. Popular sites have hosted videos of minors, assault, and revenge porn, including Pornhub. People can get the wrong impression and ideas about sex from porn. Some porn is violent, some porn is racist, misogynist, transphobic, fatphobic, etc. Porn is usually made for the male gaze, not G-A-Y-S, G-A-Z-E. Mainstream porn promotes an unrealistic standard of beauty. Porn is not a replacement for good sex education. Some people use porn in unhealthy and problematic ways and exhibit compulsive behaviors around it that negatively affect their lives. And children should never be exposed to pornography. That is abuse. I am not here to debate these things, but what I am here to do is tell you things that you probably haven't been exposed to before, because there are also other things that are true at the very same time that those things are true. And it is really, really hard to find accurate information about them, specifically because of the religious and political climate in America. And I cannot even tell you that I didn't truly understand the scope of that statement until I started researching for this class. Just in researching for this class, it became so apparent to me that evangelicals have hijacked the conversation around porn in this country, even in the secular world, even in popular media, even sometimes in progressive media outlets. It is absolutely mind-blowing. So for example, when I was looking for information, I saw a headline in a Men's Health magazine that said something about the effects of porn. And I clicked on it because I'm like, cool, I want to know this. And when I started reading the Men's Health article, I searched for the source of the study. And I realized that the source is a professor at a private evangelical Christian college who had written a book talking about porn from a Christian perspective. This is in Men's Health magazine. At no point in the Men's Health article did they mention any of that. And I don't think it's because Men's Health is a Christian publication, like this is also a magazine that talks about like lifting weights and blowjobs. They weren't trying to hide that. I think they just truly didn't look into it. Another example, I see a study about porn as a predictor of relationship dissatisfaction. I want to read this study. So I noticed it's on a website for a policy org that promotes American ideals. Interesting. I click through to the original study, and it's from Brigham Young University, which we all know is a Mormon university with a very strict honor code, and its authors are employed by Fight the New Drug. This isn't impartial information. If you look up porn statistics, the very first page has these following results. I did not exaggerate this list. You can do it yourself. If you go to Google right now and search porn statistics, the first page of Google search results, a ministry that has a for-profit porn recovery, promoting their stuff. Covenant Eyes, which I know many of you have had experience with. Covenant Eyes is software that, Jasmine, you probably don't know this because I know this isn't your forte, but imagine if I put Covenant Eyes software on my computer, that means that I want to be held accountable for looking at porn. And I can set it so that if I look at porn, it immediately emails you, my husband, my pastor, and it tells on me for looking at porn. That's Covenant Eyes software. I know, I see your face.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fight the New Drug. That's an organization we're going to get into a little more detail around. And you can just see that the things on this list, all in the first page of Google search results, are all things that are either Christian-based, selling something, or have some sort of agenda like that. Psychology Today, even when you look at Psychology Today, you have to look at who was writing the articles. Any psychologist could submit something on Psychology Today. So even if you see someone on Psychology Today talking about porn, I would look at what their research is, who they're affiliated with, etc. This is when I get on a soapbox. Let me turn my light on here. What started as fringe right-wing views on porn have infiltrated mainstream discourse, and that's largely not being questioned. The anti-porn groups of the 80s and 90s did not succeed in eradicating porn. So what they did was rebranded for a younger generation who cares about social justice. So we're talking about organizations whose roots are in promoting sexual purity and in trying to eradicate the entire adult industry, now have changed their mission statement to say that they care about public health and sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. It is media strategy. This is documented. I am not saying this because it's my personal opinion. I'm going to give you lots of evidence of this. But they're rebranding conservative ideas of sexual purity as something progressive. And I feel like the photo that I put on here super illustrates that. Like, these look like cool counterculture punks, but they're wearing Mormon propaganda clothing. Fight the New Drug is the first organization we're going to take a look at. They very much will say they are not religiously affiliated, that they are, quote, just the facts. They were founded by all members of the LDS Church, and the person who's the director of research is a professor of marriage and family studies at Brigham Young University, and his research interests are modern threats to marriage, which he considers homosexuality. This man is incredibly anti-gay. He filed amicus briefs against same-sex marriage for federal cases, for state cases. I mean, that's this man's body of work. Fight the New Drug is behind the Porn Kills Love movement, and they present their material in public schools in Utah without needing to get parent permission or without having to get the school board's permission. And can you imagine what would happen if sex educators wanted to do comprehensive sex ed in schools without getting a parent's permission or without getting the school board's permission? That would not fly. In fact, in Utah, you cannot even talk about birth control in sex ed unless you specifically talk about its risks and the negative things it can do to you. But Fight the New Drug can go in with their Mormon ideology and present pretty faulty statistics. Fight the New Drug's research, they state that their campaign is founded on thousands of peer-reviewed research studies. This is a quote from top-tier neuroscientists, clinical psychologists, sociologists, and more. But their citations largely include writings in pop psychology and by writers who are not conducting actual research and do not have backgrounds in sexuality research or treatment. The leaders and presenters of Fight the New Drug who go into schools and talk to kids, they are not mental health or sexuality professionals, and they do not have training in this area. I see a typo, noted. But I put this photo up again to show that, like, it's a cool kids campaign. They're trying very hard to make it a cool kids campaign. I imagine many of you have worn Fight the New Drug t-shirts. I know plenty of folks who have. It's a campaign that's pretty attractive, you know, they make it look really cool. The next one, let me take a sip of my Diet Coke for this. The next one, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Who can disagree with being against sexual exploitation? Their mission is to build a world where people can live in love without sexual abuse and exploitation, which sounds great. However, when you look behind this, they are the same organization that is Morality in Media. They started as Morality in Media in the 60s. This is a religious right organization. In their early years, they campaigned against sex shops, sex toys. They campaign against the decriminalization of sex work. They campaign against sex ed, any literature that they deem obscene, profane, or indecent. In 2015, they rebranded and they changed their name so that it was very similar to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And this was not accident. They rebranded with the help of a major conservative rebranding organization. But there hasn't been any change to like who funds them, who the members are. But somehow they have fooled the mainstream media, which I don't mean to sound like a Fox News person by saying that, but they've become the go-to experts for some mainstream media sources on subjects like human trafficking, sexual exploitation. Before they rebranded, when they were still called Morality in Media prior to 2015, the only publications that cited them were like Breitbart and LifeSite News, which is a Catholic website. But now even progressive publications will cite the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, not even realizing or looking into the fact that these folks have always been morality in media and that, have the same agenda. In 2015, they successfully pressured Walmart to remove Cosmopolitan magazine from its checkout aisles. Yes, Jasmine, Cosmopolitan. I did have a graphic here. I see that it didn't work, but it's no big deal. It was just their logo again. And they are the ones who decided to start calling pornography a public health crisis. I want that to be clear, that their public health researchers, public health professionals did not get together and declare porn a public health crisis. This morality and media group did. Good quote about this organization: the purity culture ethos of shame, abstinence, and fallen women still permeates this group's activism, but it's been repackaged as a bid to protect women and kids from sexual trauma and harm rather than to uphold the sanctity of marriage and biblical womanhood. All that to say that if you're seeing this group talk about pornography, I would not trust that the information is unbiased. The next group just straight up, yeah, Jasmine.
So relevant to that, there is a question in the chat, if I may. It says, a bias makes scientific articles questionable. However, it does not fully invalidate certain findings. Are some of the data around porn found by scientists who may have a religious bias not true? Have you found findings by a scientist who is religious that are true?
That is a very big question that I will get to. I'm not saying that all science is invalidated, but I right now just want you to know who these organizations are and what their agendas may be. The next organization that we're going to talk about sounds religious in name, Exodus Cry. It was founded by someone at the International House of Prayer, which of course I learned about from my ex-evangelical clients. The word IHOP did not mean International House of Prayer to me. But Exodus Cry was founded by someone from IHOP, which, if you're familiar, incredibly conservative church. And IHOP itself was founded by a man who was anti-Semitic, anti-LGBT, and part of like when Trump was campaigning, he was part of Trump's like Pentecostal wall of protection. Those pastors that would pray over Trump to usher in a new awakening. Those are the folks behind Exodus Cry. They define sexual immorality as all sexual activity outside of the marriage covenant between one man and one woman. They say that toxic sexuality is to blame for abortion, teen pregnancy, and the implosion of the nuclear family. Exodus Cry altered its mission statement to remove all references to Jesus and prayer. And now their mission, if you look at their website, it says that they're against trafficking. But they are still deeply in favor of strict Christian purity. When you look closer at the organization, there's actually an old purity covenant online that some people dug up, where if you wanted to work with this organization at all, you had to answer questions like, have you ever had homosexual thoughts or feelings? That I didn't put that up here, but it's accessible online. You can find that pretty easily. Exodus Cry makes no distinction between victims of non-consensual assault and trafficking and legal adult performers and sex workers who choose to do sex work of their own volition. They say there's no difference. This means they don't listen to sex workers. They do not even recognize that male or trans people can be trafficking victims and survivors, because it seems like in their mind, like gender is very strict and men would not be in that role. That is, women and children, they're very much trying to save. They assert that eradicating porn is fundamental to ending sex trafficking. They ignore survivors of trafficking who do not fall in line with their views on sexual purity. And these are the folks who are behind the trafficking hub movement. There was a lot of noise a couple years ago in 2020 about Pornhub having videos up of non-consensual situations of assault. That is true. I'm not saying Pornhub is innocent in any way. They are not. But Trafficking Hub seeks to shut down the entire adult industry. Quote from someone that I also found very useful: the fundamental concern for these organizations isn't healthy sexuality. It's adherence and obedience to a Christian fundamentalist worldview. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I know most folks who come to my work they don't trust this kind of organization, these kind of churches, to give us accurate information about sex at all. And so I just want to make it clear that like these folks are not going to be your best sources of information about pornography. If they had an agenda to keep sexual purity and purity culture and heterosexual marriage very much in everyone's lives, then that's still the agenda when they talk about porn. So it's kind of answering the question of the person who asked. The research put forward by these organizations, it's important to look closely behind it and see where it comes from, who's doing it, what their methods are. I am not here to tell you that all their research is wrong. I just hope to give you some literacy skills so that you think to do that for yourself. So if you do see porn statistics, you can be like, who is doing this research? Do I trust this person? Do I trust this organization? And do I trust where it's coming from? You can make up your mind, but I just want you to think about like the literacy aspect here of where the information comes from and who it's coming from. Yeah, Jasmine.
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute. So there's a question asking if any of your research connected some of the information that you found to a QAnon attributed conspiracy theory about elites drinking the blood of trafficked children, or probably like, a larger question would be, did you find that there were connections between some of this point of view about porn and like super extremist right-wing, like
you just asked the best question at the best time. I believe that might be my next slide. It is. Whoever asked that question is a mind reader. I want to make clear that I'm not saying that all people against porn are right-wing extremists. That's not true. There are tons of people that don't like porn, that don't think porn is good for the world, who are not in online forums talking about how it is a Jewish conspiracy and an elite liberal conspiracy. But I do think it's important to note that these beliefs deeply proliferate in dark corners of the internet and have crossover with the religious right. Crossover between white supremacists and anti-porn beliefs have gone back at least since the 1970s, with folks being very upset that porn was normalizing like interracial sex. People have thought that Jewish folks control the porn industry. They have put it out there that porn corrupts white women and, ruins the white family and disincentivizes procreation among white people. And there's often crossover with the NoFap movement, which is, the movement that tells men that masturbating like greatly reduces their virility and messes with their mental health. I am not saying that anyone who believes that they shouldn't masturbate is an extremist or is a white supremacist. Absolutely not. But I am saying that there are crossovers in some online spaces among folks who share these beliefs. Proud Boys, that right-wing organization, they are against porn and masturbation. There have been several murders, including mass murders linked to anti-porn sentiment. And one of the most recent happened in Atlanta, 2020 or 2021, where a young white man went into an Asian massage parlor and shot and killed many of the women working there, and I think a guy working there. We don't even know if the folks in that massage parlor were sex workers, but this young man wanted to eradicate the temptations. He wanted to eradicate the sources of his temptation. I am going to include articles about this extremist angle in the resources I send out. So if you are interested in reading more, there's plenty of information out there. I'm kind of waiting for Siri to come on to talk to us a little bit about Pornhub, because she knows a lot more about it than I do. So this might be a slide we revisit, but I'm bringing it up again because it is the largest site in the industry and it's a complicated topic. Sex workers have criticized Pornhub because once you film a scene, you actually don't make more money off of it. It's not like when you film a Hollywood movie and you get royalties. It's usually there's a flat fee made in filming a scene, and then Pornhub, people click and click and click, but you don't get money for that. So people that are involved in the industry have criticized Pornhub. Like any major large platform that's taken a lot of business, there are problems with it. Channels have been removed from Pornhub that showed revenge porn, that showed minors, that showed assault. In 2021, they finally caved to some pressure and decided to remove videos from unverified users. And the number of videos on their site went down from 13 million to 4 million. But interestingly enough, Pornhub currently has some of the best identity verification practices in the industry, and compared to other major websites. So this is something very upsetting and disturbing, but violent content, child pornography, and depictions of assault also constantly get uploaded to Facebook, to Reddit, and to other major websites. Like so many, it's deeply upsetting. And lots of the anti-trafficking organizations, they don't go after those sites too. They tend to just go after Pornhub. And people in the industry feel like that's because Pornhub is low-hanging fruit, and because they do they're saying that the agendas of the anti-trafficking organizations are to eradicate the adult industry in general. And that's why they don't focus on the other websites where there's also child porn and where there's also exploitation. I'm just repeating other folks' opinions. I am not saying that all of these are my opinions, but I want you to know some of the conversation happening around this. So this is a sentiment, again, I put a whole quote up because I think it's really important and I want to impart this on us. Sex trafficking is real. Sex trafficking is awful. Jasmine and I have worked with many young people who have been trafficked. It is real. Anti-trafficking groups, though, are often not that invested in stopping trafficking, because if they were, they would listen to sex workers. Often they want to eradicate the entire adult industry, including pornography, and paint sex workers as victims in need of rescue. Anti-sex trafficking is a topic that's easy to get behind, right? It's easy to get political backing, fundraising, and popular support. But they're couching being against sexual slavery, they're couching their other views in that. And that means they can shut down more nuanced and difficult conversations about the ways that politicians, businesses, antiquated laws, and poorly written sex trafficking legislation have hurt and killed people who are working in the consensual porn and sex work industries. Nobody is pro-trafficking. I mean, no reasonable human is pro-trafficking, let me say that. But the anti-trafficking groups have used this issue to advance legislation and policies that they know hurt sex workers, and to further their cause. And very much so, these groups often want to eradicate the entire adult industry together, which is why I'm letting you know this, because if these are the organizations that are putting out all of the statistics and information about porn, I just want you to be aware that there is an agenda behind that. And while their statistics may be things that they got from science, I want you to take it all in, knowing the whole picture. I think it's important to talk about what folks who actually are in the adult industry have to say about their work with some of these groups. For example, the group Exodus Cry. They have, made a lot of noise about kind of like saving people from the sex industry. And sex workers who have worked directly with them have said that Exodus Cry does not listen to them. They make it sound like every single person that works in the sex industry is a victim. They value the ideology of eradicating sex work over the actual stories and voices of sex workers. Sex workers have said that these organizations have done things like defunded AIDS programs that worked with sex workers. Catholic groups have used fighting trafficking to block funding to anti-trafficking programs that offered referrals for birth control and abortion. So again, we're seeing these like deeply puritanical values tied to some of these organizations. There are other anti-trafficking organizations that are doing great work, and I'm going to put those in the resources, and who are not ignoring the voices of people in the adult industry, who are not ignoring sex workers. I want to talk about this scientist for a minute because I just learned all about her and it is fascinating. Nicole Prouse is a neuroscientist who did work at UCLA and now works at an independent lab. And she does research about porn's effects on the brain. And her findings have not been in line with what anti-porn advocates say. And this woman has been doxxed. She's had to move her home several times. She now lives in a protected address. She talks about how other sex researchers in the United States have left the country because when their research directly contradicts anti-porn campaigns and for-profit porn addiction rehabs, they get harassed out of their work. If you ask this woman about going into sex research in the United States, she usually says, like, go to Canada or Europe. Her work has upset a lot of people. I put some interviews with her in the resources. If you want to know more about Nicole Prouse and her research, we're about to talk about some of it. I want to make clear before I start this section that I am not saying that people cannot experience really difficult problems in their lives as a result of porn use. Nobody is debating that. But what we are debating is the science around what makes it addiction. So since porn has become very easy to access, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not it can become addicting. And there's also been a massive growth in treatment facilities who offer recovery programs for people who self-identify as porn addicts or whose partners identify them as porn addicts. I've spoken to some folks that have gone to these rehab facilities, which tend to be largely religiously affiliated. Again, I am not the expert on what happens inside these facilities. I'm telling you, I've spoken to people and gotten their anecdotes about it. And it is kind of a grim picture. So, is porn addiction real? Here we go. Nobody is saying, again, that out of control sexual behaviors are not real. Nobody is saying that people have not had their lives greatly affected by their pornography use. But the way that addiction is defined in scientific research is very different from like the lay understanding of addiction, from the general public's understanding of addiction. Porn addiction, according to research of independent laboratories, does not neurologically behave like other well-documented addictions. This is where I will state again, I'm not a scientist. I am giving you an educator's review of some scientific material. In the largest neuroscience investigation of porn addiction, subjects who reported experiencing problems as a result of their pornography use did not display characteristically addicted brain activity when viewing sexual images. They were shown images of all kinds of things. Some things were pleasant, some things were unpleasant, and some things were sexual. And when they were shown sexual images, their brains did not behave the way an addict's brain would behave. In fact, they actually showed decreased brain reactions when shown sexual images rather than heightened activity. So again, nobody is saying that self-described porn addicts are not experiencing problems, but neurologically speaking, they do not appear to have the same relationship to porn as a substance abuse addict has to their drug of choice. So what the researchers concluded is that porn and sex addictions are probably not clinically addictions, and actually treating them that way can be harmful. So calling it an addiction, some people will say, well, it doesn't matter what you call it, it's harmful. It actually does matter when what you treat it with is dependent on what you call it. So if we're calling it an addiction and treating it in an addictions model, we may not be helping, we may actually be causing more harm. That is the assertion of the scientists here. As far as an official diagnosis on porn addiction, there is not one in the DSM. In 2019, the World Health Organization added a diagnosis of compulsive sexual behavior disorder. Compulsive sexual behavior disorder is an impulse control disorder, which is different from an addiction. And again, I'm not a psychotherapist. I am not a clinical psychologist. I'm just letting you know what the research says. CBSD is not an addiction. It's an impulse control disorder, and there is a difference. What CBSD is a persistent pattern of failure to control intense, repetitive sexual impulses or urges, resulting in repetitive sexual behavior over an extended period that causes marked distress or impairment. Another interesting thing that has come up in research, especially the research of someone named Joshua Grubbs, I'll put his stuff in the notes too. When I tell you I have information to send you, everyone who's registered for this, when you get the email with the class recording, you're going to get all my sources, and then you can read them and you can come to your own conclusions. What Joshua Grubbs' research has said is fascinating. His research shows that feelings of addiction to porn tend to be high in people who are very religious. So porn addiction or feelings of addiction to porn may be better construed as discrepancies between porn-related beliefs and porn-related behaviors. A study from last year found that those who self-reported as religious and who were more morally disapproving of porn were more likely to perceive addiction. Feeling addicted to internet porn is associated with depression, anger, and anxiety, but the actual use of pornography was not associated with depression, anger, and anxiety. These findings suggest that perceived addiction to porn, but not porn itself, is uniquely related to the experience of psychological distress. I also want to make it clear that I'm showing you research that is not easy to find. The other stuff, the stuff that Fight the New Drug puts out, is very easy to find. That's the first search page of Google results. So if you're like, well, Erica's not presenting the whole story about porn, I'm presenting the story that's hard to find. The other part of the story is the story we already know that's super easy to find. Let's talk for a minute about these often religious-based porn rehab facilities. Many of the US treatment centers for porn or sex addiction are either explicitly religious or have a strong religious bent. We're not talking ones that are like based on scientific evidence. The websites often say things like porn is as addictive as alcohol, drugs, or gambling, and this is a proven fact, but fail to state a citation. Put a lot of statistics on their websites without citations. One particular place where Josh Duggar went, say no more, we know that person's story. If you don't, he is from a very famous religious family, and I believe he's now in jail for childhood sexual abuse. Josh Duggar went to a porn rehab. And on the website for that porn rehab, there's all kinds of information about how homosexuality is a threat to inundate the nation. So these are not scientifically based, evidence-based rehab facilities by and large. Often the treatment will say like, Jesus can heal the unhealable. If you're looking for a rehab with some proven results and some methods that have been studied, it does not tend to be a lot of these facilities. Please look into them if you especially know someone who is going to one. A clinical psychologist who did a lot of writing and talking on this subject said something that I think is very interesting to consider here, that the idea of sex addiction is used extensively by religious groups who have moral issues with sexual behaviors, and that by claiming that sex or porn is an addiction, They get to pretend they're addressing a public health issue rather than imposing their views on other people's behavior. One more time, nobody's saying that there are no problematic behaviors around porn. Nobody's saying that the use of porn can't ruin relationships and lives, but the addiction model is not the way. And it also just keeps getting, think about it. If we're saying that porn is an addiction, that's fueling people's shame. And we know that shame in turn fuels people's feelings of addiction. It's kind of all this like self-fulfilling thing here, right? Yeah, you have a hand up?
I do. So someone in the Q&A section wanted to ask if any of your research kind of created correlations between sex addiction and that kind of addictive behavior, and like social media addiction.
I didn't actually come across anything that specifically addressed social media addiction, but that's a fantastic question. And I would be curious to see if that research is out there or if someone's working on that research now. That's a great question. So what do we do when people do have these sexual impulse control disorders or behaviors that are very much harming their lives and those around them? I know our friend Siri is going to get on here soon, but I want to make sure that we are continuing this. Jasmine, if you see her name pop up, you can look at all the participants. If you see her name pop up, can you let me know? Because I might have to turn on her camera for her.
Okay, I will look.
Okay. So there are proposed treatments for people who do experience distress related to porn use. This therapist in particular has a fantastic website and practice in New York City. She thinks of porn use as an expression of all sorts of internal conflicts, including moral incongruence and relationship struggles and potential symptoms of underlying disorders that have never been assessed or diagnosed. And she works specifically with men who have impulse control disorders around sexuality, and says sometimes she finds that it's actually like ADD or ADHD, and they're seeking out pornography as a way to like be distracted and not have to like perform the tasks that they need to perform. I mean, that's just one tiny example. But her advice as a clinician who works with people exhibiting compulsive sexual behaviors is that when seeking help for what one might experience as problematic porn use, it is critical to ask a potential therapist what their beliefs are regarding porn. Many therapists are also impacted by the culture at large. And I would want to know, like she's saying, you should ask them, do they believe in the porn addiction model, or do they want to use a larger biopsychosocial lens to think about what their sexual behavior might mean? Also, this is fascinating. So again, I will say this ad nauseum, people have problems with porn and its use, but the focus on addiction can cloud our ability to address these problems and maybe make them worse. Especially if you want to actually change your relationship to porn, using an unscientific label of addiction is not going to help you. So this is according to therapists who do this research and this work. One model that has shown promise is the acceptance commitment therapy approach, which does not seek to eradicate all porn use, but it does seek to reduce viewing over time. And in a preliminary study at Utah State University, men who were treated with this model had experienced an 85% reduction in viewing, along with an increased quality of life. And some of the work in the acceptance and commitment therapy approach involves investigating their attitudes about viewing porn. And if it starts to seem less like a terrible taboo thing to do, the compulsion to do it lessens. It's fascinating. I mean, when I think about it, I kind of think of it similar to like eating disorders. If we have severe limits and restrictions and we are restricting what we can eat, it can make food the only thing we think about. I say that from experience. So yes, Jasmine.
Two things. I was just listening to what you were saying, and I just wanted to chime in and say, I think there could be there's a similarity to attitudes around when you are young and encountering or enjoying or dealing with alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
like a lot of people for whom alcohol is super taboo, they like end up being over the top with it, whereas
Yeah,
people who don't have the same kinds of like shameful feelings or taboos around alcohol consumption don't like necessarily go as hard when they're drinking
totally.
as young people. But also I wanted to say that you have been presenting, and somebody earlier in your talk was saying something very similar about their own life and their own connection to porn. And once they left a particular
She is.
community in which it was, you know, super taboo, their desire to constantly consume porn decreased significantly.
Yep. And it is fascinating how that can happen. Siri, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hi. Is your video, can you turn your video on, or do I need to do something?
I think you do, because I
Okay.
tried starting it and it says the host has not allowed that.
Okay, I'm gonna make you a co-host. That way you can turn
Okay.
on your video.
Excellent.
I hope that we can have 3 co-hosts.
Okay. Yep. It just
Here
let
we
me start the
are.
video. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, hold on. My lighting is a little weird and backlit.
That's okay.
I'll try to turn that up a little bit.
I wanted to let you know where we are at in the presentation. I have not gotten all the way through everything. But I know we have you for an hour. Let me see here. Let me see what's on the next slide. So the next couple slides are important. They're about porn literacy for young people and about talking to your partner about porn. Are you cool
Love
with
it.
just kind of hanging out with us for like, I don't know, the 10 or 15 minutes that it's gonna, while I go through
Absolutely.
these? Okay, cool.
I'll adjust
Thanks
my
for being
lighting.
here. Cool. All right, so once I get through the rest of my presentation, then it'll become a very interactive thing.
Awesome.
So no one, oh, there's another typo. Every time my Virgo ass sees a typo, I like have a little death inside. All right. No one is denying that minors have unprecedented access to porn and that they're accessing it. Oh, yes, they're accessing it. The numbers about when they first start to access it are a little bit hard to find, because once again, it was a widely shared statistic that most kids saw porn by age 11. And when you trace the origins of that statistic all the way back, it comes from a man who like self-published an anti-porn book in like the early 2000s. There's not any scientific study that says 11 is the age. It's probably more likely 14. Also quite young, but still difference in maturity. And that means parents have more time to talk about it with kids if 14 is the first age. The best resource for finding how to talk to your kids about porn is the organization Sex Positive Families. Super transparent. I got a lot of my information directly from Sex Positive Families. In fact, I'm going to be quoting them extensively on the next slide or two. So talking to your kids about porn is incredibly important. Pretending it's not a thing is not going to help you. Silence around it creates more power. If you're not talking about it with your kids, I mean, they're not going to have any guidance. And so I think it's incredibly important to have this conversation with your children. Ideally, it'd be before they ever saw it. So depending on your kid and their maturity level and what they have access to, that might be before puberty, before they have their own phones and access to the internet, before they're spending unsupervised time with older kids. And when they start asking you questions about sexual health topics, because if you don't answer their questions, they might go looking for the information. Even if you don't have kids yet and you think you want them, even if your kids are too young for this talk, I think it's important to ask yourself, how do you feel about porn? How do you define it? How does it play a role in your life? So that when the time comes for this conversation, you have prepared yourself and you're like ready to have it. Direct quotes from Sex Positive Families about pornography conversations. These are wonderful scripts. So if you have a kid before the age of 10, the general script is so gentle. It's like, It's normal to be curious about bodies. If you ever come across pictures of like people naked or touching each other's bodies or private parts, this is for adults. This is not for kids. If you see this stuff, you're not in trouble. Just come talk to me about it. Like, that is the chillest thing to say to your kid. And I think it's a wonderful way to open up dialogue about all kinds of sexuality issues with your kid. For kids that are older than 11, it's something you can say like, hey, I know this is weird to talk to your parents about, but like, this is a normal conversation. If you see porn, I want to make sure that you understand what you're looking at, because you're not seeing what is reality for most people. So tell me, have you seen it? What have you heard about it? And if your kid is already in a relationship where they trust you with this kind of conversation, it's going to be a wonderful prompt. If your child has already seen porn, this does not mean you failed as a parent. It means you're living in 2022, right? Like, it's easy to do. Doesn't mean that the world is over. It doesn't mean that your kid is now going to engage in all kinds of compulsive sexual behaviors. Just take a moment and realize that it's happened. It's okay. And these are the points to go through with your child. It's normal to be curious. You were not in trouble. What you saw is pornography. It's not for kids. There can be messages in it that are very confusing and unhealthy for kids. Provide them with safe alternatives. Like, hey, if you're curious about bodies, if you're curious about boobs, like, here's a book made for people your age. And Sex Positive Families has a fantastic reading list that you can find on their website to give you those alternatives. Can also be helpful to have agreements with your kids. Like, okay, well, if you see something, I want you to come talk to me. Maybe you should only look at the internet when we're together, but involve them in those conversations so they don't feel like you're just being a parent that's trying to control their behavior. Again, this is the sex positive parenting advice. I don't know what kind of relationship you have with your children, and I'm not telling you that, you know, you don't get to make the decisions about your kids. You absolutely do. Some parents might take a approach where they're more interested in installing software in the computer, but I think that it can be helpful to let your kid know that's what you're doing so that they don't feel like surprised or like they're in trouble. Again, ask them what questions they have, affirm their experience. Like, I know you're curious. I'm happy we talked about this. Make sure they don't feel like they were in trouble. Because if they do feel like they're in trouble, they're not going to tell you the next time they see porn, or they're not going to ask you questions about it. The next slide, you're going to see porn literacy talking points for kids. And I think some of these can be really important for adults too, who were not raised with any kind of literacy around porn. And if you were raised in purity culture and the only thing you got is like, it's addictive, it's terrible, then you're not getting the nuanced talking points of porn literacy, which is why I put them on this slide here. So some of those talking points, you might find that you enjoy seeing sexual images, or you might not. That's fine. Not everyone likes it. Porn is made for adult entertainment. It's entertainment. It's not to depict all things that are in real life, and it's not for kids. I think Siri will probably tell us too that, like, what you see in porn, people are professionals. You know what I mean? Like, they are professionals who are really good at their job of entertaining us. And I've heard the quote from sex educators. It's like, you wouldn't learn to drive by watching the Fast and the Furious. So you might not learn how to have sex by watching people that are professionals doing it. There's a big difference. It does not always provide an accurate representation of sex and bodies and consent and relationships, depending on the type of porn you're watching. It often fetishizes certain types of people. It may not always show consent or communication, depending on the type you're watching. All these talking points will be, you know, you will get all these slides so you can read them. But I think a lot of these points are important for adults too, especially that there are ethical versions of porn that can offer different depictions of sex, and we're about to talk about that. But you might have to work to find those. And it's also important to note that people who consensually work in the sex work industry deserve to have safe, equitable employment conditions, be fairly compensated, and to be respected. And I think that's important to impart on young people and adults alike. And that no one should ever force or coerce another person to consume porn or make it. Like, this is a thing where consent is paramount. Talking with your partners about porn. I know this is really like what a lot of people want to know. The best advice that we have is first figure out some of your own feelings. And I have in my next slide a sexual values exercise that I put in the sexual values workbook specifically to help you figure out your own feelings around pornography. But if you can identify those, it's going to be helpful going into a conversation with a partner. So ask for a time to talk and let them know you want to talk about porn. I would like to talk to you about watching porn. I know it's a touchy subject, but I think that, I really love the way we communicate in our relationship, and it's something I want to talk to you about. Face your own insecurities about this. I know a lot of us might feel like, if my partner watches porn, does that mean he only likes those bodies? Does that mean he doesn't like mine? Is he comparing me to the actors? Is he watching things that don't reflect our sex life? And what does that mean about our sex life? These are important questions to ask yourself, like, what, if anything, about porn in your relationship or having your partner watch it does make you uncomfortable? Are you worried that it will affect your health negatively? Are you worried about addiction? Are you worried about, your partner's ability to continue to be turned on by you? It's time to be honest about these things. And if you're worried about exploitation in the industry, that is something that we're about to move on to discuss. Another thing that's important to consider is that, like, movies aren't the only option. If you are interested in exploring like sexualized media, there are podcasts like Dipsy, there are written erotica stories. You can write your own erotica stories. There are websites where people just do fan fiction. Literally any universe you can think of, any fictionalized universe, there is porn fan fiction about it. Guarantee. I have stumbled upon it and been like, oh my God, I can't believe people wrote porn about this, but they do. So it's out there. And if you're concerned about people being exploited in the filming of porn, nobody's being exploited in the writing of porn. This is just ideas coming out of someone's head. So if that's something that you're concerned about, that might be a better option for you. And when you're talking to your partner about these things, I think it's really important to be vulnerable with each other, listen to each other, and remember that your partner might have also been raised to think about this topic in ways that make it a really difficult conversation. And we should be curious about what they have to say and listen with empathy. Some of the things that I put in my sexual values workbook to kind of prompt you figuring out your own feelings about porn are some agree, disagree statements. Like, think about this for yourself. Agree or disagree. Porn can be created in an ethical fashion. Consuming porn can damage people's respective women. Think about some of these questions, and like, there's not a right or wrong answer here. So if you're watching this webinar and you're thinking, well, I do believe it can be contributing to disrespect, and I do believe it's addictive, I'm not telling you not to have those feelings. I'm not here to make you feel my values, but I think it's important to get a clear sense of what your own are. Some other statements you might want to consider. And again, you will get these slides, you will get this presentation, you can pause and look at these yourself. If you have the sexual values workbook that I put out, it's also a section in there. But some of the things you might want to think about are true or false. It's okay to use porn when you're in a monogamous relationship. People have different feelings about that. There are some folks that, to them, monogamy does not include masturbation to other images, or it does not include watching sexual films, and that would be your decision. Do you want to know if your partner looks at porn? Do you want to know what kind they look at? Do you want to know how your partner feels about sex workers, if they respect them? How do you feel about people that are in porn? How do you feel about people who watch it? These are all really important questions to ask ourselves. And it's fine if your feelings on the matter are complicated, because it's a complicated issue. This is definitely one of the most complicated issues that I feel like there is in sexuality. There's not an easy answer. When I teach people about pornography, I don't say it's all great, everyone should have access to it without any caveats. And I also don't say it's the worst thing that's ruining lives and causing a public health crisis. I think there is so much in the middle. And that's really what I'm hoping to, get in your minds with this class here. So again, some of the things that you can ask yourself about your own feelings, and these can be great talking points to have with a partner. And then it'll be up to you and your partner to make some agreements with each other. Interesting thing to think about is, what if I don't want my partner to watch porn at all? I'm of the camp that we cannot control another person's actions, but I do think that if you feel very strongly that you don't want your partner to ever watch pornography, that it would be helpful to understand why. Like, what is the reason or the purpose that you don't want them to, and what do you think you will gain from that? What do you think that attempting to control whether or not they watch porn will achieve for your relationship? Is there anything else behind your desire to set these limits? And will this change the relationship in the ways that you're seeking? Or is there something else going on there? It's a big question. But these, I think, are some good starting points to tackle this issue in your relationships. The conversation around ethical porn, and I'm really glad you're here for this, Siri, because I feel like you can maybe start to chime in, even though I would definitely want you to introduce yourself. But I actually learned a lot from you when I did a promotional thing for an ethical porn company one time. I learned from people in the industry that using or considering certain types of porn ethical and others not often creates an unfair dichotomy in the industry and further marginalizes an industry that people already have a lot of misunderstanding about. That's something that I want to put out there. The word ethical kind of means anything to anyone. Like when we slap an organic sign on a store and say organic produce, there's not a standardization across the industry. Terms like ethical and responsible can be subjective to those making the porn and those viewing the porn both. The treatment and working conditions of the performers is first and foremost what makes porn ethically produced. Whether or not the content is ethical is deeply subjective. That is deeply depends on you and what you think ethics are. So quick lesson here. Ethical treatment of performers would include things like everyone's consenting, everyone decides who they want to have sex with on camera, people are being paid, the working conditions on set are safe, people get breaks, people aren't, being forced to work long hours without pay and breaks and things like that. Siri, what would you add to that ethical treatment?
I mean, those 4 points are pretty, they cover a wide range of different types of films that could be produced. I mean, I don't know if there's anything that would be a more general point that I would add to that list. I mean, okay. I'll probably touch on this when I do Q&A anyway.
Yeah.
And I might have more specific points to add to that. I mean, right now, I will just go ahead and add a small point that probably the most ethical porn of all is that which is created by the performers themselves, which is why I'm really a proponent of subscribing to people's personal, OnlyFans is just one side of many, but anything like that, where the performer is self-producing, not only are they getting most of the money from that, but they made it. So that it's what they wanted to make in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to ethical and content, again, this is different depending on different people, but what you may see, and especially in websites that advertise themselves as ethical porn, you might see things like consent and communication between performers on screen. Sometimes they'll have like interviews with performers before and after they do the scene, like kind of talking about it. You will maybe see safer sex practices like condoms. You might see the avoidance of certain types of content. So avoiding like harmful racial and gender stereotypes. Some of these sites do not feature themes that tend to make women uncomfortable or other people uncomfortable, like incest. Like we're talking like the avoidance of deeply taboo things. But then it comes to stuff like BDSM. Like if everyone's consenting BDSM is deeply ethical, there might be people that are like, well, I don't want any violence in my sexual content. And some sites will let you choose, like, do you want to watch more hardcore? Do you want to watch rougher sex? Do you want to watch more like emotional and, you know, vanilla sex? And you can choose those options on some websites. So another thing you might see is specifically for women, focus on women's pleasure. It's not just all like for the male gaze. You're going to see women having orgasms and experiencing sex acts that tend to be most pleasurable for people with vulvas. So one of the sites I know, this is the one that I promoted before in a paid promotion, Balesa, they describe their content as the sex isn't aggressive, violent, or degrading. It's intimate and pleasurable. But the truth is, lots of women like sex that is aggressive and degrading, and it's consensual. So that is still ethical, which is why the word ethical can mean different things to different people. So like if you're in a sexual situation and you're like, yes, I want to do this roughly, I want you to put your hands on me, or I want to involve bondage, that is still consent and that is still ethical. So you might find that on some of these sites, or you might find options to not view that stuff. I do want to just shout out that creating porn that's not specifically for the male gaze is not a new thing. Feminist porn has a long history. Starting in the 1970s, we had women like Annie Sprinkle, Carol Queen, Candida Royale, and Nina Hartley. When I was in college, my roommate was studying feminist porn, and we used to have these women's VHS tapes in my apartment, and we would watch them and just talk about how they were very different than the porn that you would find, you know, in someone's brother's closet. Like, it was very focused on female pleasure. So feminist porn is not a new thing at all. And queer porn, there is so much queer porn being produced by queer creators. One of the notable creators is the woman in the bottom right. Her name is Shine Louise Houston. She is responsible for a production company called Pink and White. And The Crash Pad is a series that she has been doing since like the mid 2000s and still goes on today. And you're going to see gender diversity. You're going to see trans people. You're going to see, you know, people with all different kinds of body types, all different identities, having all different kinds of sex. And there's a lot of racial diversity. I want to take a moment to talk about race particularly. Racism in porn has been a big conversation for a long time, and it's not something I'm ignoring. I want to make sure that you know that I am aware of that. Whenever I said this class could not possibly be comprehensive, I have read about and heard stories about performers of color being paid less, getting less work, being treated poorly in the industry. This is absolutely something that happens. In queer porn, queer porn and porn that's created by and for people of color doesn't have that kind of issue. But there is absolutely racism in the porn industry. It is not something that we're pretending doesn't happen. Like I said earlier, the porn industry tends to reflect culture at large. And if you see racism and misogyny in culture at large, you're going to see it anywhere in any kind of art and literature industry. So kind of where we're going to move into our Q&A is that if you decide that pornography is something that is part of your life and that has a place in your life, viewing it with intention is important. Finding ethical porn is not about watching a certain type where people only have vanilla sex, but it's about understanding how your buying power plays a role here and thinking about whose business practices you support. So all labor under capitalism is vulnerable to exploitation. In the porn industry, in like factories, in the creation of every product, there is vulnerability to exploitation. But we can do our best to be ethical consumers. And one really important way to do that is paying for the pornographic content you consume. When I talk to my individual clients about this, I often compare it to like clothing and fashion. If I just need to get dressed, I can go to Walmart or H&M and I can buy their clothing. It looks good enough. It's going to work. It's going to cover my body, but I don't know who made it. I don't know if the person who made my clothing gets paid like 30 cents an hour and works 16-hour days. I just know that I needed clothing and I needed it fast and I can afford that cheap stuff. But if I am an ethical consumer, I will go to where I know who's creating it. I know that they're making it just for me. I know that it's being made under conditions that I support, and I'm probably going to have to pay more for that. Porn is very similar in that way. Siri just mentioned purchasing it directly from the source or performer. There are people that, you know, if you see a performer you like, if you've come across someone on maybe a free site, you can probably find their social media. And if you find their Twitter or their Instagram, that will probably link you to where you can go purchase it directly from them, whether it's OnlyFans or I don't know what other platforms are happening. I know OnlyFans is like the one that gets all the attention. So purchasing directly from the performer. And think about if you're willing to pay for stuff, people are going to create more of that. So pay for what you want to see more of. If you decide that pornography is something that you want to enjoy. Recommending ethical porn is a tricky thing because information changes very quickly. I might have a site on here that you know something about that I don't. I might have a site on here that, you know, somebody is like, oh, well, they, you know, I heard something bad about them or a violation of one of their performers took place. So I'm putting it out there that this is a general list of websites that tend to be considered ethical in their production. But ethical is defined differently by different people. Some of these websites are actually like real couples that upload their own porn. Like Make Love Not Porn is one where like if you and your partner want to make a video, you make a video and you put it up there. So that's another way that people are creating and sourcing content. So yeah, I want you to become savvy consumers of info about porn and also savvy consumers of porn itself. I want you to be wary of anti-porn and anti-trafficking campaigns that do not include the voices or input of people who are actually doing the work and of organizations who explicitly have the promoting heterosexual marriage as the only form of sexual expression underneath all those values. And I think that porn literacy is very important to everybody, adults and children alike. And the last thing I'll say is I want to be very clear that I know that porn is such a touchy subject. It can cause a lot of harm in people's lives, but the addiction lens that we are using for people and the shame we're putting on people is not helping. It is fueling more and more shameful behavior, more like impulsive and compulsive behavior. And that is being fueled by a lot of these for-profit rehabs. So it's just a side of things that I don't think gets talked about nearly enough. There you are. I'll put your Q&A up so you don't have to stare at your own face the whole time. Jasmine, did you have a question from somebody before?
Yes,
Yeah.
before we moved forward, there was a question about whether, Erica, if any of your research discussed or explored the use of porn as part of like trauma therapy or for helping and healing.
I have not come across research that talked about that directly, but I did come across research by Dr. Nicole Prouse that said women's experiences of using porn is overwhelmingly positive and can connect us to our sexuality and get us in touch with our desire. And that is not research that you see very often, but I put that in the stuff I'm going to send everybody so you can read it for yourself. But yes, in the research about women and our pornography use, it has been overwhelmingly a positive effect on women's sexual health, according to those studies.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So thank you for being patient and listening to me finish up my section. I'm very honored to have Siri Dahl here with us here today. She and I met on Instagram at some point. I don't even know. And we just, became friends that way. And I did her podcast at some point. So I appreciate you because you are so transparent about how much you enjoy the work you do. And you're also just like so yourself. Like, I don't feel like you're selling a fake sexy person. You're just like also like let people see you in all aspects of your life, which I think is very cool.
Thank you.
So yeah, welcome. And I'll let you take the floor now. I know you wanted to tell us a little bit about like how you got into this work.
Yeah, I wanted to start there because it is a little bit of a story, and I think it helps frame my experience especially for Q&A, so that everyone in the class here kind of has a better understanding of where I'm coming from as a performer. So I got started. Sorry.
Oh, I took the screen share away so that we could just look at
our I love that. I had a split screen on my computer where I had my like little like points I wanted to talk about pulled up, and it like went full screen on its own and like got rid of it. So let me just pull that back up before I continue. Sure. That's great. I didn't know Zoom could do that. Spooky. All right, here we go. So I just a little bit of my background. So I feel like I want to just say at the top here that I was not really raised in a Christian purity culture, but I was raised Christian. Like my mom's dad was a Lutheran pastor. So my mom, like I was raised going to church and youth groups, all that, church camp every summer.
That sounds pretty Christian to me.
It was pretty Christian, but I mean, I'm from Minnesota. So like Minnesota Lutherans are not very like, it's a very, very like easygoing approach to Christianity. And I found that out because I moved to Texas when I was 12. So the extreme contrast between how I was raised in Christianity versus the more Southern Baptist variety of Christianity that I then began to experience as a teenager, I saw the differences and noticed them immediately. And it honestly was kind of the thing that led me to being like not really strongly identifying that way any longer, because I started to feel a little bit uncomfortable with it. But all that's very far into the past. But I just wanted to add that as like a little extra background there. So I was like a late bloomer. I didn't have much sexual interest at all until after I graduated high school. And I was kind of just like a dork, like a theater nerd in high school. What I started to realize after I finished high school was that a lot of my I guess my best friends always used to joke about me being like asexual when we were teens. And I just kind of was like, well, whatever. I like brushed it off. I was like, I don't have interest in dating anyone, whatever. It's not the right time. But then I started to feel very strong attractions to other women when I was 18, 19, and like had moved out of my parents' house, was living on my own for the first time. So fairly soon after I got very like strongly identified enough with being queer that I had decided to come out to my family as a lesbian. And I, started dating my first like long-term partner, and the first person I ever dated was a woman. That was a big part of my journey for me. And that also it wasn't my first exposure to porn, but it was my first exposure to porn that I actually paid attention to. I would say all the previous exposures were very much in passing. And it was like, I was a teenager, maybe I was like, I remember there were a few times when I was in high school and someone would like pull up a weird video on some website and be like, look at this crazy thing. And I would just like watch it and be like, like,
Yeah.
it was always like the shock value was the
Yep.
point. And I didn't find it sexually arousing. And there were maybe a couple times I like did internet searches in the early 2000s. I'm 34. I just turned 34. So for the bulk of my youth, there was no free porn on the internet. It was not easy to get. If you could find it, you would have to download it from like a torrent site. And also back then you didn't have iPhones. You were sharing usually a family computer. So I wouldn't have done that because I wouldn't want my parents to find it.
Yeah.
So I had very little exposure to porn, like in general. By the time I discovered I'm very glad that you mentioned Sean Louise Houston, because that literally was my introduction to porn, really, was Crash Pad series. I bought a membership.
Good first introduction.
It was fantastic. Honestly, so that was my first intro. Was at 18, I bought a membership to Crash Pad series. At this point, I already strongly identified as queer, and I was just looking for something that represented what I was interested in, and that's what I found. I subscribed to that site for a while, and it was really the thing that triggered the desire for me to want to actually be a performer. And as we'll get into, like the type of performer that I am now that I've been in the adult industry for about 10 years, I'm not known really as a queer performer. I've never shot a scene for Crash Pad series. I haven't, it's very funny. My journey over time changed, because even though I first had the idea that I wanted to do porn at 19, I did not actually perform in any films until I was almost 24 years old. So and really the reason for that is I was in college. I was in school. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Eventually, when I finally did decide to try out performing in the adult industry, it was when I had an ex of mine that I met. I was very open with him from the beginning about what I was interested in doing with my career. And we had met on the basis of not wanting a monogamous relationship. That it was also a part of my personal journey, is that I learned about myself that I don't prefer that as my like personal life. So yeah, essentially that kind of opened some doors for me, because I like, the thing is, I don't know that I ever would have actually moved to Los Angeles and started shooting porn alone. Like that was a little too scary for me, especially since I'd never even been to LA, but being in a partnership with someone who supported my choice and was willing to move out there with me, because he had a job that was very easy for him to carry around. He was like a contract worker and he could live basically anywhere and find a job. So that made it really easy for me to try it out. And it was kind of this thing where it was like, well, we'll go move out there, we'll try it. If I hate it, then we can just come back to Texas. If I like it, then we can stay. And obviously I ended up liking it.
Yeah. I don't know where, I know you have talking points you want to do, but, and I don't know what order you want that in, but you were not in the industry for 10 years straight. There was a point where you quit porn. Are you ready to tell us about that?
100%. Yeah. So the aforementioned ex that I just referenced, that was not a great relationship overall. Like, honestly, the best part of it, I would say, is that it gave me the ability to fearlessly go for something I wanted to do for myself, because I felt like I had enough of a safety net with my partner to do that. But the thing was, as this is a very common with performers in my industry, because of the stigma that we all face, I've met only maybe like 2 performers ever who like were open with their parents about their jobs from the get-go, and their parents were like not horrible to them about it. It's very, very common that performers are fully excommunicated from their families. immediately when parents find out. That was more or less the case with me. So that was very, very hard. It also led to a situation where now I'm in a relationship with someone who is considerably older than me, who had just more power in the relationship by way of their age. And I didn't have any sort of social safety net from my family anymore, period. So I became pretty codependent on my ex, and he became increasingly manipulative and controlling in the relationship. So after we were together for just a little less than 3 years, but by the time I started out in the adult industry, like shot my first porn films in 2012, and by the end of 2014, my mental health was just the worst that it had ever been in my life at that point. And I, out of self-preservation, really, I made the decision, the very, very hard decision for me, that I wanted to completely give up my career in porn, because I understood that it was the only way to accomplish two things that I really needed for my mental health, which was, one, to get away from my ex, and two, to reestablish connection with my family and to improve the situation there, because it was really, really bad. For a couple of years, I only saw my parents like twice in 3 years, and it was strained both times.
Yeah.
So that was the reason that I ended up taking a 5-year break from the industry, which at the time, I call it a break now because I came back. But at the time, it was fully a retirement. That's how I would refer to it.
Yeah.
So I was completely out of the adult industry from 2015. And then I came back in 2020, January. So literally exactly 5 years, pretty much, I was gone from the industry. And I accomplished the two things I wanted to accomplish. I completely was able to cut my ex out of my life, which improved a lot of things for me. And then I was also able to repair relationships with my family. And one of the things I've learned that I think is important, I share this with other performers, especially newer people to the industry, because navigating family relationships can be very, very hard when you're in this career. The biggest mistake that I made was that I did not tell my parents what I was doing. I thought that I could hide it from them until I knew if it was going to be a permanent thing for me. As in, I mean, you know, you make one porn, it's on the internet forever. It's always permanent in that regard. But I mean, like, if it was a career choice for me, I didn't want to tell them what I was doing until I knew if I wanted to seriously go for it. But it takes zero. I mean, I learned this quickly. I had shot one movie and it hadn't even been released yet, and my parents found out.
How? Do you know how?
Yeah, it was like people that I used to work with at my civilian job that I had right before I moved to Los Angeles. They knew, some people knew through the grapevine why I had moved to LA. And they told someone else who knew a sibling of mine who told my sibling. And then that sibling told my parents. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, can you explain to non-industry folks your use of the term civilian?
Oh, yeah, it is very common in the porn industry that we refer to non-porn, non-sex worker folks as civilians, and it is not a negative term. It's just a easy shorthand for someone who doesn't have experience in sex work.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, that's like the same with military. So
yeah,
like, yeah, I get it. So let's see, why did you go back? And what's your relationship like with your family now?
Yeah, it's funny because it's such a weird journey for me. I think the reasons I left were extremely valid, and the reasons that I decided to come back are also valid. And it kind of is this full circle thing, the way that I see it. So I live in Kentucky, of all places. There's not any porn production that happens here. I think I might be the only person in the state who is regularly producing porn. but the reason I moved here is because my parents had moved here during the time when I was out in Los Angeles before 2015. And my motive to come here was really just that I wanted to be close to them physically, like geographically, and be able to see them whenever I wanted. So for the first several years that I moved here, I really did that. I put a lot of effort in. There were a lot of extremely difficult conversations because one of the misconceptions that my own parents had about my choice to do porn was that, well, very early on initially, they literally thought that I was being trafficked. That was their first response to that, was that they thought that I was being given drugs that were impairing my ability to make decisions, and that I was being trafficked against my will. It was really, really hard for me to tell them in a way that they actually understood what I was saying. Like, no, this is not that. This is fully my choice. Like, even though, and I think the fact that I was with a partner at the time who was older and clearly supported my decision to do porn, I think that clouded their ability to understand that a bit, because they were thinking, well, how could you really be making the choice when you're dating this person who's older than you and is probably using you in some regard? And they weren't technically wrong about that. Like, he was a terrible person at the end of the day, but he's not the one who had the idea for me to do porn. Once he was removed from the equation, once I moved to Kentucky and he was not in my life anymore, and I still told my parents, no, that was my decision and I still owned it, then they really had to begin to do the work of understanding why the hell I would choose a career in porn. And that was very, very hard for them to understand. I will say that to this day, they still don't fully understand it. That's probably a generational difference. It's a difference in values that we have. I don't think either of my parents have ever watched porn. I mean, I'm sure they've seen it, but like, have they put considerable time into it? Are they fans of porn stars? Do they know a name of anyone? No. And they're elder boomers. They're like in their almost 70s now. So that's part of that. But over the years, that I was retired, that 5-year period, having these continual conversations where I would kind of like touch base with my parents and talk about my experiences with them, they slowly began to understand that not only was it definitely my choice, but that I always stood by the fact when I would tell them about my decision to leave it, that it wasn't because I was upset about my career. Like, I didn't really have negative experiences in the porn industry. I would have loved to stay in LA and keep doing it. I just knew that it wasn't feasible given all of the other factors in my personal life that were making things hard for me. So when I ultimately decided to come out of retirement to come back to performing was early 2020. And I planned it in advance. I had been working a regular, like a desk job in an office for a year and a half before then. And I loved my job, but that job actually, because I had other jobs during my retirement period, but the last one that I had before I came out of retirement just kind of killed my soul just enough that it did two things for me. It had me kind of going stir crazy, sitting behind a desk all day and feeling like, wow, like what was weird is I loved the work that I did, the actual work. I just hated the way that I had to get it done. And so there was that, just the feeling of like not using time well, or that I was really using my brain to its fullest potential, if that makes sense. And then secondary, it was the like more corporate environment. It was very, very hard to function that way for me. I did not like having to spend 8 hours a day on someone else's schedule, being paid, I mean, really underpaid considering the value of my labor and the very specific skill set that I had at that job. I was an editor and copywriter. So that job had me feeling some things about my own future and what I would want to do. And that was when I also started my podcast that I used to do called After Adult. So at that point, I like had a really big think with myself and realized I really wanted to go back into sex work. And I felt sure enough about it to at least start like an OnlyFans page and dip a toe back in, while not quitting my civilian job. But as soon as I saw that I had the ability to get enough income from dipping a toe back into sex work, that in the first like couple months on OnlyFans, I made as much as I would make that whole year in my civilian job. And at that point, I was like, I will be quitting this job. I do not need this. And I had to, and I had a very, very hard conversation with my mom. And I told her first because I knew that a conversation one-on-one with my dad might literally actually give him a heart attack, and he had just had heart surgery. So I had a conversation privately with my mother where I told her that I'm going to go back into the adult film industry, and it was really hard. And it was hard, but I'm glad that I did it that way, because it was very important that I respect her the way that she deserves to be respected, by just telling her my intentions and not doing the thing that I did when I was 23, where I hid it and then she found out in a very not great way, you know? So that actually opened the conversation in a way that things have been so much better for me in a personal regard, the last several years since I came back, because I will say, like, at this point, now that I've been back in the business for 2 years, I don't talk to my parents about my job.
Okay.
They don't need to know specifics. They don't really ask, but they do actually respect me. Like, and that is very important to me, like having their actual respect. Regardless of the details of what I do to earn income, they're aware that I'm a successful business owner, and they definitely respect that. And that's meaningful.
Yeah.
So
thank you for sharing all of that, like the deep interfamily dynamic stuff. One thing I'm curious about, that you just said, like, I'm a successful business owner, and I feel like it's important. Tell us, like, what it is like you don't just make money because you make films for other people. Like, I get the sense that you have lots of different income streams, and that most people in the industry are like independent contractors.
Yes, that is true.
Tell us about like that kind of detail stuff about the industry.
So almost everyone in the entire adult industry, performers, crew members, like everyone that I can think of really is a contractor, which means you're not an employee of the company that you work for, meaning you don't get a yearly salary or benefits at all with that contract. You are getting a contract for one scene, or if like for crew members and directors, it could be like a certain number of scenes every month or something, but it's contracted nevertheless. And that also means that, like, so taxes, right? The bane of everyone in my industry's existence, at least, because we're all contractors, you don't have taxes taken out of your checks before you get them. You have to keep track of all that and do a whole lot of work at the end of the year to report that income and pay the appropriate amount of taxes. So basically, whatever check I get for a scene, I know that probably 25 to 30% of that is going to have to be set aside, because I'm going to owe that in taxes, since it has not been taxed yet. But basically, the contractor status gives us as performers or crew members, whatever we do in the industry, the freedom to work for anyone, really, and the freedom to declare your own rates for the work that you're doing. I personally think it's a good thing that most of us are contracted. If I were considered an employee of a studio I shoot for, that would be kind of weird, because I only there are no studios that hire me that often, that it would be like really a sustainable form of employment. And even if they were gonna like log me as an employee, it's not like they'd be giving me healthcare. So like, what's the point?
And then you have, you talked about how people can like come to you directly for content you create. Like what is that like?
Yeah, most of my income. So as a business owner, if I were to like break down my income and expenses, it's like 85 to 90% of my business profit zone is OnlyFans. Like that is literally my bread and butter, and that is most people in my industry. Like the way that I look at it is I already had a name in the industry before I retired. So coming back, I didn't have to try that hard to like regain a fan base. Like I already had a fan base that was still around. So I just made an OnlyFans and started advertising it, and people started subscribing. But now that I've been back at it for a couple of years, like, yes, it's important to continually like get new eyeballs on your content. And the way that I do that is my business essentially is like the OnlyFans is the sales funnel. That's actually how I make a living. The reason that I continue to fly out to Los Angeles every single month is because shooting for studios gets my name and my face out there in front of new people, and then exposes them to my OnlyFans.
Okay.
So there's a beneficial relationship there, but honestly, I spend more money traveling out to California to shoot every month than I even make when I'm out there. So, yeah.
This is all so interesting. Thank you for telling us all that. So like, I feel like things that folks are going to want to know, tell us, like, everyone wants to know, are porn performers exploited? Are you treated badly? What is your experience as a performer and as somebody is like who's seen a lot in the industry?
So to answer that, I'll first just give us a little box that we're working within for that question, which is I am what I would refer to as a mainstream porn performer, meaning when I shoot for studios, I'm shooting for the more mainstream straight porn studios. And that doesn't mean that they're all straight. Like I shoot for Adult Time a lot. They do quite a lot of queer and like trans content, but they're still a mainstream studio. So that's kind of what I mean by that. But basically when you're in that kind of arena of the industry, it's all of the production in the US for these mainstream porn sites is centered between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. There are some companies now that also shoot in like Florida and even some in Arizona, but mostly it's in LA and Vegas. And unless you are fortunate enough to have an online presence where you can book your own work directly, you are most likely represented by a talent agent.
Okay.
I don't have a talent agent. I've been booking myself since 2013, but when I was brand new, I did have one for a brief period of time. So the talent agent typically acts as a buffer between employment or like, hiring requests. Like if studio wants to hire this model, the talent agent is the buffer there. So yes, they profit from that relationship, but a good talent agent will vet producers so that they know they're not sending talent to an unsafe place or to a illegitimate business. And I will say that like, not all talent agents in this industry are great. There are several horror stories that I've heard. The reason I don't have an agent now is because I absolutely could not stand the guy who was my agent when I was new to the business. But like agents who are well known and respected in the industry, they might fuck up a lot, but they are not going to send their talent to an unsafe place, So I just want to get that out of the way on the top, because I think there is definitely a misconception that the way the industry works is just like random people hiring models to do whatever the producer wants, and it's really not. It's extremely like organized and professional. Even like all talent agents that I know in the business are like, they really emphasize professionalism, meaning if there's any unprofessional conduct on any set by the production or the talent, that's going to cause problems. Like there's going to be a big conversation about it.
Okay.
So the issue of like whether performers are exploited is, it's kind of frustrating to me as a performer, because I've felt far more exploited as a retail worker than I ever have as a porn performer.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because when you were talking about having your soul crushed in a corporate environment, I was like, this is just bringing up labor issues, you know,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
labor issues that are far beyond sexuality.
Mm-hmm. I think ironically, the stigmatization of porn and sex workers has a lot to do with the labor issues that do exist in our industry. So for example, I saw someone in the comments in the chat box a while back had mentioned like adult performers, or like the porn industry needs to unionize. And we do have a union. It's the Adult Performing Artists Guild. It's not a super strong union though. We also have a trade association, which is called Free Speech Coalition. Not the same thing as a union, but the FSC, which is what we call it for short, has more political power than the union does.
Okay.
It's just been around longer, since the 90s. So that's really why. They just have more loyalty from big players in the industry because they've been around for so long. But really, the game that we've been playing in this industry for the last 40 years is combating stigmatization in these waves where like the industry is demonized and attacked. You know, we can talk about like the Mies Commission in the 80s.
Yeah. I didn't talk about that directly, but
Mm-hmm.
the Mies Commission was a product of Ronald Reagan. I'm sure there are many Ronald Reagan fans in this room, just kidding. But that was like a direct, a commission to like regulate porn, and they tried to, some guy wanted to appoint himself the porn czar, which meant his job would have been to just watch porn and decide like which was bad, and you know, not at all.
Not sus at all.
No. Yeah, so the Mies Commission, that was the attacks in like the 80s.
Yeah. So, which is also, I believe that during one of those hearings was when Larry Flint, the founder of Hustler, testified. And so like there's been this has been a thing that happens repeatedly. And I mean, that was not that long ago. I will say frequently when I'm shooting for studios, I'm working with crew members or directors who were shooting porn then, and they remember those times. So there is definitely, I experience from the elders in my industry when I'm on set, an attitude of like, well, this is just going to keep happening. So basically if I frame it this way, it actually makes a lot of the weird, what consumers or civilians might think of as like weird things about the porn industry, even to the degree of like, I'm going off on a tangent now, but like, why, for example, we can take the question of like, why is like faux cest, like fake incest porn so popular? Well, the industry has been in this place for the last literal like 40 years where everyone's expecting our ability to make a living to just be made illegal at any point. So when you find something that is profitable, you try to profit from it as much as you can, because it might be taken away tomorrow.
Oh, that is,
there's really a like, get it while it's hot. Like,
Mhm.
so it actually leads to some weird decision making in the industry. But so that was my tangent.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is just the stigmatization of our industry feeds into it being hard. It's harder to operate ethically as much as we want to. There are so many good people in this industry who have the best intentions, but when you are, it's really hard to organize or to unionize to represent yourselves when you are trying to fight to merely exist. If you can't even exist in a valid way in the eyes of the government or people, politicians, then how are you going to fight to get power? Like, we're starting from a place where we don't have power at all, in
Yeah.
terms of politically. You know, there is a lot of money in this industry, but
Yes.
weirdly also the biggest corporations in porn are not based in the US, they're based in Canada. So they
Oh.
don't actually have much of a political voice in the United States.
Okay. That's so interesting. I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of that. I want to ask you some of the questions that people are asking in the chat. And one of them is, have you ever been in a situation where you felt stuck or coerced into doing something you weren't comfortable with at work?
There was only one shoot I've had in my, I mean, I say 10 years because I started in 2012 and it's 2022, but I had the 5-year break in between. So cumulatively 5 years of shooting. And there was one shoot where my boundaries were violated and I expressed that on set and it was not dealt with the way that I would prefer by the crew. At the end of the day, it wasn't, I would not refer to it as any form of abuse. What it was a miscommunication above all else. Essentially, I don't know, I don't really feel like I need to give extreme details, but I was shooting a scene where I had requested that my body not be marked or bruised in any way. It was very important because I had a shoot later that week that was a big deal. And if I had bruises on my body, that other shoot could be canceled and I would lose money from that. So I requested of my scene partners that they not leave marks on my body. And as we're filming the sex scene, I started to feel like this is probably going to leave some marks. So I kept calling cut and saying, go lighter, like you're going to bruise me. I can't have that happen. And then we'd roll on film again. And then it's like, they would just forget. They would just like go back into the moment and forget. And then, yes, I ended up having like really bad bruises on my body from that. But in the set, this is a good example actually of like how on set scenarios, it's like, I know performers who would have been exactly in the scenario that I was in that day, and they would have felt that their consent was violated and that they were abused in some manner. I didn't come out of it feeling that way. I mean, a big part of that may be because I already knew the director. I'd worked with him multiple times. I knew both of the talents that I was working with in that scene, and I trusted those guys, and I'd worked with them previously and had a great experience. So I did not feel like any of it was like an intentional, like, oh, we're gonna do this. I understood it to be like, like sometimes, especially we're all performer personalities, like you can get really absorbed in the moment. And a directive such as, don't pinch me that hard in that spot, you'll leave a bruise, can be something that you hear, but you forget in the moment. So it was kind of tough because I definitely left set that day feeling like, well, that was fucked up. Like I called cut several times and asked them to adjust their behavior. And it seemed like they did try, but not hard enough. And there was a point that day when I just wanted to kind of walk off set and be like, fuck this. But I also knew that at that point, I already was going to have bruises. So if I walked off set, I would not only potentially lose my pay for that scene that day, but at that point I had bruises and I knew that I would lose my pay later that week for the other shoot. So I finished the scene and it ended up being a good scene, but it did suck. I still lost the money from the shoot later that week. And it was a tough situation. I will say, I don't think that type of thing is terribly uncommon. I think it's far, far less common now than it used to be, because what I just described, that was in 2013. And one thing that I love that has become the norm now on studio sets, every studio that I work for actually nowadays, the two studios I work for most often are Brazzers and Adult Time, and they're two of the biggest companies in adult period. Both of them have very, very good practices around consent checklists, which means that there is a physical, like a paper checklist, like a form that you fill out before you ever touch your partner in a scene, where you do a very detailed list of do's and don'ts of any physical contact that you want or do not want in that scene. And then you also you typically, sometimes they film it, sometimes they don't. Like usually if they film it, it's just for posterity, so they have a record of the conversation. But there is also a one-to-one conversation with the talent who's going to be having sex in the scene, and any, sometimes there's a talent liaison on set who participates, as well as a director. But that's basically just a conversation where you also go over the checklist you just filled out in detail. And that's your opportunity to talk to your coworkers about anything that you do or do not want in that.
That is so fascinating and awesome that that is done. I frequently tell my clients in their personal sexual relationships to do a yes, no, maybe list together.
Mhm.
And it kind of has that vibe, but like a much more official, like,
Yeah.
we're doing this as an important part of our professional interaction together.
It is really important. And especially things do change when there's a camera on in a room and you are having sex and you're performing. Everybody changes. Like, I have sex differently with my boyfriend in my personal life than I do when I'm on camera. Even with my boyfriend, because he does perform with me too. It's like, we are different with each other when there's a camera on, even if we're the only people in the room, than we are if there's no camera. So it's important to have the consent conversations before a shoot, if for no other reason than sometimes you get in a zone, like everyone has to find their zone where they're like comfortable in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And sometimes your brain just does this thing where you literally can forget something, which is kind of why I told that story at the beginning of this, because that's how I felt things were. I really felt like my co-stars in that scene were just like, the camera would roll, they go into performer mode and they forget, oh, I'm not supposed to leave bruises on her boobs or whatever. So, but having that very face-to-face, very detailed conversation before you shoot a sex scene helps with that, because you're not gonna forget at that point. It's not like something I casually mentioned. It's like we had a very intentional discussion and a paper checklist that we all signed about this.
I'm glad you're sharing that, because I don't think people know that, that is some seriousness around consent,
I will say I'm glad that it's a thing, that it's standard now in the industry, but it kind of took too long to become a standard. I really would blame that on just the slightly more blasé attitudes of some of the elders in the industry. There's definitely a group of folks who are like, well, this works fine, why change it? Or I just want to shoot my movie and go home. I don't want to spend an extra 20 minutes doing a consent talk,
Right.
So there was a little resistance to that, but now that it's been more standardized, it is something that I see on just about every single set I go to.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I have some great questions in the chat. One of them is, initially, what was it about working in the porn industry that appealed to you? Did you know people in the industry before you moved out to California?
Initially, it was that I knew. So one of the things that I think about myself that makes me an interesting porn performer is the fact that one of the greatest features of my life has been trying to discover what I'm into sexually. Because I didn't have anything in that way that imprinted on me that I could think of from a young age. I don't know, some people have a fetish that they discover they have in adulthood and they connect it to something related to when they were younger, and it's like, oh, this big moment. And I've never had that. I just felt lost. And I felt like there was something wrong with me when I was a teen. I thought, my friends joked that I was asexual, but I seriously thought maybe they were right for a while, because I was like, I have little crushes on people, but it's never sexually motivated. So when I already talked about Crash Pad series and how I discovered queer porn, it was that really opened my eyes to oh, well, I'm very, very interested in sex, but I guess I just hadn't seen it portrayed in a way that I connected with on any personal level. So that was the thing that opened the door. And the thing that made me want to do it was realizing that I was very aroused by the idea of performing sexually for other people to watch.
Okay.
So also known as like exhibitionism.
Yeah.
So when I discovered that about myself, then it was like, oh, I think that I would really like to have a career in this, and maybe I'll be good at it. I won't know until I try, but I should try that because I feel a very strong like pull to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and as I mentioned earlier, I was like a theater nerd in high school. So for me, a lot of what my enjoyment from my career in porn is the performance aspect. And that doesn't mean that the sex isn't real. Like it is, but it means that for me, knowing that someone's going to watch it makes it more fun.
Mm-hmm.
Really. Like it actually enhances my sexual enjoyment.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's probably my biggest motive for wanting to do it as a job. I would say that financial motivation was the least of my concerns initially. It wasn't even something I thought about. Like I didn't think I would even really make enough money to survive on it.
I was going to ask,
I just wanted to try it and see what happened.
When you went out there as a young person, did you think like, I'm going to be a porn star? Like a name?
I hoped that I would be, but I didn't have the confidence going into it to assume that that would be the case.
Mm-hmm.
And a part of that was also that when I started, I'm thick. I'm not a petite woman. And in 2012, there was very, very little representation for my body type. I was not the first, but one of the first to make a more mainstream impression that for being, I think like a size 8 at the time, which isn't even like objectively, it's not a plus size, but the industry, it's just like modeling. Like you think of, oh, you're anything above a 2, like you're plus size now, which is bullshit.
No, I remember you saying on your podcast that when you first got into the industry, they BBW'd you, like you were BBW porn.
Yeah, I was, yeah. I had disagreements with producers and the original talent agent that I had over how I should be branded. There were a lot of people who wanted to brand me as a BBW performer, which is a little more niche. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with it. There's a lot of performers that I'm friends with who use BBW as a term to describe themselves and their content. It is just not what I wanted to do for myself. I didn't want to be thought of as a niche. I wanted to be thought of as mainstream as possible, mm-hmm. To reach as many people's eyeballs as possible, because I'm an exhibitionist.
Well, that leads me into another good question. You might have already answered this, but somebody said, one of the thoughts that has haunted me is how would these performers feel if they saw me pleasuring myself to them? I've always told myself they'd be skeeved out about that. But thinking about that now, that could seem very silly. Anyway, what's your point of view about your viewers and fans?
I feel very positively about my viewers and fans. I mean, I skipped over this when I talked about why I came back into the industry, but now it's relevant to the conversation, so I'll add it in. I mean, really, I was already feeling like I wanted to come back into porn, but I had a little cold feet about it because I was like, well, I left 5 years ago. What if everyone forgot who I am?
Yeah.
Like, what if people are bitter about me? Like I had a breast reduction surgery while I was retired. So I was worried about how my fans might react to that. Yeah. But that was the thing. When I decided, like, it was really a solidifying moment that caused me to decide for sure to come back to the industry full time, was when I realized that I had a whole ass subreddit still devoted to me as literally it's like Siri porn star.
Even though you had been retired for 5 years.
I'd been gone for 5 years, and there's a subreddit with almost 100,000 subscribers at the time, which was like active, very active. And I was like, oh my God, like there's still that many people who are enjoying all of my scenes that I've done. Mm-hmm. And that means a lot to me. Like, and over the years, I've had really positive fan interactions. And so, like, actually, like I said earlier, I don't really tell my parents about the details of my job, but there was one time when my mom actually asked about, it was when I told her that I was going to come out of retirement and go back into adult films. And she asked me this really like tough question, which was, don't you feel guilty about people who are addicted to porn and it like tears apart their marriages and their families? Because you're helping produce that, like you're profiting from and participating in that. And that was a question from my own mother.
Yeah.
But the way that I responded to her was like, you know, well, I think I might have had an aside that was like, well, by the way, porn addiction isn't really proven to be like a thing in the way that like chemical addiction to like alcohol or drugs is. But I was just like, Mom, I can't feel guilty about doing something that I know that I have the definitive proof that like helps so many more people than it harms. And a good example is this story of, I have a fan who used to, I haven't heard from him in a while, but he was a pretty hardcore fan back in the day when I was newer, and he would email me occasionally. And he wrote me this kind of lengthy email once that was very, very sweet, and described how he and his partner were big fans. And he was able-bodied, but his partner had, I believe, cerebral palsy, and they were in a wheelchair and were, for the most part, like unable to interact with him sexually. But they'd been married for like over a decade, and there wasn't a lack of sexual desire there. There was just a lack of physical capability to do things. And it was harming their marriage because he was like, well, I have needs that I would like to satisfy, and I know you can't really help me with that. So how do we like make this work? And I guess they had like looked at some porn together and found one of my scenes, and they both agreed that they liked me a lot and that they would like to watch more of them. So it kind of became a thing. And he wrote me this email just to be like, you literally saved my marriage. Like I was thinking I would need to like get divorced so I could like have sex, and here I am, like my partner and I are like having our own version of whatever sex works for us, but your videos are like helping us do that and have both feel satisfied and more connected to each other. And it made me cry.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And yeah.
So somebody just asked, I mean, you have evidence, like you just said to your mother, like, I know that I cause a lot of positive things in the world by doing this work. In addition to that particular email, like, can you think of any other like positive effects you like know you're having on people?
That was the most detailed one that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, it's uncommon these days. Social media is different. I don't really get a lot of lengthy emails. I think people probably try to DM me some long stories, but I wouldn't see them because I have to filter my DMs. But
I get long DM stories too, which are fine, but I don't always get to see them because of the volume.
Right. Yeah, you kind of have to. When you have a lot of followers, you can't leave that open. You'll never get anything done. But I regularly get fans who reach out, and they may not go too much into detail, but like there's a strong feeling of like, hey, like this, like I enjoy your presence. You strike a chord for me somewhere that feels important, and like thank you for doing what you do. And I actually get a fair amount of feedback from women who are happy to see someone with a, thicker body type. And I feel weird saying that sometimes because I'm actually a pretty, like as far as the possibilities go, I'm a pretty like standard sized person. I know I'm not plus size, but I do realize that like in the porn industry, there are not very many women who reach a level of popularity that I have, who have cellulite and like a high body fat percentage and all that. So I do get a good amount of female fans who are like, hey, like I'm really into the fact that you are just like you're doing you.
Yeah, you jiggle.
Yeah, exactly.
Jiggle, right?
Exactly.
Someone wants to know, do you face fears about losing traction as you age? And then they threw in, what's your skincare routine?
I love the skincare question, and I will answer that in detail. Yes. So having just turned 34, I can't lie. Like, I definitely have anxiety about aging in this industry, and it's not as related to appearance as it is related to the fact that, like, in porn times, in porn years, we kind of joke, performers, we joke about the fact that, like, if you're a woman in the porn industry and you turn 26, like, literally it's like once you're over 25 you start getting offered MILF roles instead of college co-ed or like teen roles.
Okay.
So that's more my concern, and it's not that I've done some like MILF, like stepmom stuff, and I don't have any like ethical concerns about that, as long as nothing else about the scenario violates a personal boundary of mine. Just on its face, like, if I'm gonna pretend to be a 30-year-old man's stepmom, I'm like, fine. But because that's the thing, when I have done stepmom, it's almost exclusively been with male talent who are literally sometimes older than me.
That's
so
interesting.
Or my same age. They're very rarely actually that much younger. Yeah, it's kind of funny. But so it's really, so I'm not a mother, and I'm, you know, my partner of 4 years and I are very committed to our intention to not have children. We don't feel like it's the right choice for us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more my thing, is like, I don't like the idea of aging and reaching a point where the only options for work for me are things where I'm pretending to be a mom, when that is uncomfortable for me.
Yeah. That is so interesting.
Yeah. That being said, it's like, as long as I'm making my own content and that's marketable, then I don't have to play the mom thing if I don't want to for my own content, you know?
Right.
But I do have some concerns around that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my skincare routine. So I'm like a makeup and skincare junkie, and I used to subscribe to all the little like surprise boxes every month and just like put everything I got on my face. And I finally decided that it was getting out of hand, and I decided to commit to one skincare brand.
What is that brand?
I'd sound like I'm not sponsored by them. I'm not gonna get shit for saying this, but it's IS Clinical.
Okay.
It's really good. Like,
I don't know them. I'm a Kiehl's person. That's my one brand.
It's well, the place in town where I go and get a facial once in a while, they sell it there. So I just like got it from them because I love the lady who's done my facials and she recommended it. And when I actually bought it and like committed to just doing the one line, I'm like, oh, glorious. It's so good.
Nice.
But I never sleep with makeup on. I literally maybe have slept with makeup on one night in my life. That's like the one thing. I could be dead tired and not do shit, but I will wash my face.
Mm-hmm. Wash your face.
So that's also important.
If
you wear makeup, I mean, if you don't wear it at all, then you could probably get away with not washing your face before bed and not be all the much worse for it.
I know we have gone past the time that you committed to being here. Are you comfortable?
I'm perfectly good on time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question we have is, what do you like most about your work?
I like the freedom that it provides me more than anything else. So that's a little more of a macro answer, because it's not specific to like the actual business of doing adult. But it is really, when I think about my job and what I love most, it is the way that I literally am a business owner, and I don't have to answer to someone who's above me. Yeah. Like, at the end of the day, I'm making my own decisions, and that feels really, really good to me. Mm-hmm. And it's a double-edged sword. It also means that I'm overwhelmed most of the time. But I welcome that. I would rather be overwhelmed and live comfortably and be able to control my own hours and schedule and lifestyle, as opposed to what I used to feel like in my desk job, which was being bored a lot and like not being able to pay off my student loans.
I mean, I feel the same. You know? I'm also a business
as far
owner,
as like
and I'm overwhelmed, but I remind myself that these are the problems I chose. Like,
yes, yeah,
the overwhelm is the problem I chose. You know?
Yes, it feels really good to understand that. Yeah, it's like, okay, this is a lot right now, but this is actually what I want to do, and that's okay. And it won't be I mean, maybe it will be overwhelming all the time forever, but like the types of overwhelm change.
Yeah.
There's at least a variety of overwhelm.
True.
But I was also going to say that, like, on a more detailed level to like the type of work that I do, one of the things that I did not realize I missed so much about this business until I came back to it after a 5-year break was just the openness. Like, being on a porn set is so much fun because people are just so open-minded. Like, it's kind of a prerequisite for being in this industry. And even if you don't come into it with that attitude, you will quickly probably adapt it, because it's sort of a necessary state of mind to have, to just be very open. And I don't mean that in a way of like letting people walk all over you or anything. I just mean like there's just a casual openness, because we are dealing with sex. And we're seeing, you're like surrounded by naked people on a porn set. So it's really hard to be like extremely guarded and like, guarded is the only word I can think of, but I hope that makes sense. Like, there's just an openness that you don't feel, that I haven't felt in any other employment situations. And I love that. And I didn't realize how much I missed it until I came back to it after a year, 5-year break.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel like there's a lag in my talking and your talking. Is that happening for you too? Maybe.
I am getting a little bit of a lag, yeah.
Okay. And I don't know how to control that, but I'm just gonna ask you another question. A woman, I believe, based on the name of the person asking, big assumption on my part, wants to know if you will share what some of your boundaries are. And I'm assuming she means on set.
Yeah, my boundaries are, they're flexible. It depends on what I've been hired for. So one detail about the way that adult performers work is we are paid not hourly or daily. We're paid for the type of scene that we're doing. So, and that is for the specific sex act in the scene. So I have a rate for, it's also, I don't love the way that we term our sex scene rates, like the structure of how that works. It's very heteronormative. It's just kind of been that way for years. So, I mean, there's a slow movement toward changing it, but as it's been for a while, we, in the more mainstream side of the industry, so as like a female performer, I have a rate for a girl scene, which would be me performing with another cis woman. I have a rate for cis or trans woman, I should say. I don't differentiate when it comes to my rate. Some performers do. Don't know that I agree with that, but I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
So I have a girl rate. I have a boy girl rate, which is a hetero scene with me and a guy with a penis. And then there's other rates in between for other things. So there's I have a blowjob rate. I have a hand job rate. I have a rate for a boy girl, which is a threesome with me and one guy and another girl. I have a rate for a boy girl, which is a threesome with me, a girl. No, sorry, just me and 2 guys. So there's different rates for everything, and it doesn't matter how long you're on set that day. You're getting paid your sex scene rate.
Okay.
Period. So I could shoot a boy girl and be on set for 4 hours and get my rate, or I could shoot a boy girl for another company and be on set for 13 hours and I get the same pay.
Wow.
I forgot what the actual question was,
or what some of your boundaries are
before I answered it. But
yeah,
what was the question again?
The question is what.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I explained that first because I wanted to say like boundaries. So for example, if I know I already booked a scene in advance and I gave them my rate for a boy girl scene. So if I show up on set, I mean, a boundary of mine would be there is no anal sex in this scene because I have not quoted or prepared for an anal scene. Like, so nothing's going in my butt I might be fine with someone like touching my butthole, but it's not going to be penetrated because that's literally a different rate that wasn't agreed upon in advance. So because of professionalism, sometimes boundaries are literally like pre-existing because of the agreement of the type of scene you are shooting. That being said, like, so if I'm booked for a boy-girl scene, I know that there's going to be vaginal penetration in that scene, but that's the only real guarantee. I don't necessarily know what this detailed scenario leading into that will be, or like what other potential like sex acts might be in the setup. Sometimes you book a boy-girl scene and they're like, oh, we're gonna do a short segment of a blowjob leading into the boy-girl scene. And that's where I have the ability to be like, well, I have a boundary around that or that. So for me personally, I'm very like casual with a lot of those scenario related boundaries, meaning like I don't have a lot of personal qualms with doing like more taboo scenarios.
Okay.
A very strong boundary, this is a huge boundary that I discovered I had because I saw an ad on a porn site for this website and I was like, what the hell? There is a site that's doing taboo family scenario porn now, but it's like all around the concept of the parents of a foster child like having some sort of sexual interaction with a foster child. Like they use the word foster in it. And I don't even understand how that's able to make it through all of the various guidelines that our industry has to respect in order to be able to actually remain profitable. So as an aside for all the attendees, membership-based porn websites, so that's like basically every studio that has where you would subscribe and watch porn, they have to do their own processing to make money. Like, so when you join, like, so this isn't the site that did the foster thing, but for example, like Brazzers.com, if you join Brazzers, you're entering your credit card information, and they have their own credit card processing like partner that processes the payment. And credit card companies have a whole lot of power over the porn industry because it's actually the credit card companies that get to determine who's a worthy porn studio to allow people to use their credit cards to buy the product. So for a long time, I think this particular thing is like relaxing a bit now, but for a very long time, porn studios weren't allowed to show any squirting on camera. And it was because literally like Visa and MasterCard were like, this is too obscene for us to allow people to use our credit cards to pay for it. So, and when it comes to the taboo family related stuff, because the whole like stepmom, stepdad, stepsister, stepbrother thing has been such a big deal for so long in the porn industry, it won't ever end. I feel I'm kind of bored with it, but but like that whole taboo family relations genre, the reason that it's always stepbrother is because the credit card companies have literally said you can't sell porn that shows an imagined like fantastical incest scenario unless it's very clearly established in the lead up to the sex scene that these people are not actually related, that they're stepbrother and stepsister. So that's why that's always like a thing that you hear in porn scenes. They have to do it. It's called compliance. Okay. So I don't understand actually how there's any website that could sell like a foster child scenario and that be compliant with any credit card companies, because by definition a foster is a minor, and that is weird to me. But somehow it's a thing that's fallen through the cracks. Maybe the credit card companies just haven't caught up with it. That's a boundary that I have. Answer that. I'm just like, no, that's very, very problematic to me.
There's still a lag, which is why you're not hearing the question right now. But yes, thank you for sharing that. I have another really good question.
You're good.
Okay. Another really good question is, Do you get any say in the titles of the videos or movies? Sometimes I see titles that are so sus, and I wonder if the performers agreed to be referred to in those ways.
I would say like 95% of the time, no. No.
Okay.
The only time I've gotten to say in a title of a scene is when I have collaborated from the inception of that scene.
Mhm.
Meaning, so when I've worked with Adult Time, some of the scenes I've done for them have been something where I brought an idea to Bree Mills, who's one of their big directors, and I've collaborated with her on a scene concept from the beginning. So
Mhm.
I'm not directing it, but I'm sort of like co-writing it in a way. And in that case, like, yes, she'll actually send me the finalized script and it has a title on it. And if I had a problem with the title or had a suggestion, I could offer that. But that's rare. That's extremely rare. Most of the time, when I work for like Brazzers, for example, they have in-house script writers who choose concepts for scenes and write entire scripts with suggested talent for each role based on their data gathering, really, because they have a massive source of analytics and data, which is Pornhub, because the same company that owns Brazzers owns Pornhub. So when they write scripts, it's usually meant to hit certain target categories that they want to advertise to. So they write the script, and then they sometimes they write a script knowing that certain talent's going to be in the role, but sometimes they just write a script and then after it's done, they're like, oh, we'll put these people in it. Mm-hmm. So in that case, like, no, there's absolutely no say in what it's titled. And a lot of the time, if it's an unscripted, just a sex scene without a scripted scenario leading into the sex, like, you have no idea what that's going to be called at all. Like, you have no idea until it comes out. And it's just a surprise.
Okay. Let me check the time. I feel like we're getting to, okay, it's about to be 9 o'clock and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And also, who wants a 4-hour class? One thing that I really want to hear from you is, can you talk about the sexual health practices in the industry? Like, how are you all not just giving each other STIs?
Yes.
How does that work?
Yes. Yes, I'm glad. Okay, this is a great one to like wrap up with too, for my Q&A, because I know it's probably one of the least understood parts of our industry. So we have testing standards that we follow and abide by. This has been around. So I previously mentioned the Free Speech Coalition, FSC, and they actually started the performer screening system that we use. So basically what it looks like is there's a database of performers in the industry. When you are a verified adult performer, meaning you work for studios, or now that there's so many independent people who are doing OnlyFans content, it's like, yes, if you do a lot of content, you can also become a verified person in this database. You have like an individual number assigned. It's a very like secure database. So you go to one of our industry testing centers that reports to that database. You get your samples.
Oh no. We're not finished. She's in the middle of a question. I guarantee she'll be right back when she realizes that she got kicked off, because we're wrapping up with the question about STI testing and sexual health in the industry. And that's a very important one, and one a lot of us want to know about. So I'll just give it another second, but yeah, that would be a, that would be a sad, abrupt ending. And I think if for some reason she does not pop back on, I don't know, who knows, maybe the power went out in Kentucky. Things like that have happened. That happened to me once in the middle of a class, the power went out. So the information about STI testing when you're in the industry, she was basically, there she is, okay. I was about to paraphrase her.
Ah. Oh my God.
We can hear you audio, so if
You
know-
can?
yeah,
Okay,
I can hear
good.
you.
Okay. So can you see my video though? It's doing the thing again where it's not letting me start video until you like enable it, I guess.
Oh no, I cannot see your video, but I will just make you the co-host and now you can do it. Thank you for all of you who are still here. As I said, we were wrapping up with the STI question, and I feel like it's a really important one. So
It is. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I'm on my phone now. I don't know what happened, but apparently my laptop was not actually charging, even though it was plugged in, and it just died.
No, I get it. Yeah. So, tell us, you were telling us that all of the adult performers who were verified have a number in a database, and then there are testing centers that report directly to this database.
Yes. So the standard that we go by is 14 days. So you go get tested, and that test is valid for a 14-day window. Once that 14 days expires, even on the last day itself, you can't work for any studios. Studios like reference this database. This is very, very important to work as a studio performer. When it comes to what we call it content trades. So I, as a individual performer, if I'm just like gonna shoot a scene with someone else that's gonna go on our OnlyFans, then yeah, it's up to me to verify that person's test. And in that sense, on some level, when it's like just performers on their own, there is a bit of an honor system there. Like I have to trust that all the other performers in the industry are doing their due diligence and checking tests of all the performers they work with before they have sexual contact. When it comes to the actual, the database, the reporting system for studios, since they verify that on their end, like they know for sure, like they can check that at any time before the scene. So if I haven't tested and I have a scene tomorrow, then the director can actually check that in the database and see like, well, Siri doesn't have a test, so how's she going to work tomorrow? You know?
It makes it sound safer to have sex with folks in that database than with like a guy you met at a bar and you're just trusting his word.
Yes. Yeah. It absolutely, I mean, getting into the industry at 23, it totally changed my perspective on sexual health, because it's very, very, it's like being a performer in this industry really necessitates you understanding that not only are STIs not something shameful, that they're a part of overall health. Like, obviously, yes, you can do a lot to prevent yourself from ever getting an STI, but like, especially the fact of us as adult performers is like, you're most, even with all of the like fail safes that we have, like most likely if you're working in this industry for years, you'll get an STI at some point. It's very, very unlikely statistically that it will be an incurable one. Like I think the rate of the actual number of like on set adult like porn industry related HIV transmissions we've had, it's only been like 2 in the last 20 years or something. It's very, very, very rare. But that being said, you know, there are a lot of STIs, and something like chlamydia, which is curable. You take 7 days of an antibiotic and it's gone. Then you retest and you're okay, and you can have sex and work again or be comfortable again physically, you know? So it really was like something that changed my perspective on how I talk about sexual health and STIs, because I realized like, oh, like, you know, it's not in this industry, it's not a point of shame. If someone actually does get a positive result on a test, it's like I said, I've been in this industry for a while, and I've never actually met someone in person who has had like an irreversible sexual health issue that they were exposed to via work in adult. But STIs can happen. They do happen, but we have a system that catches them as early as possible. And not only that, part of that database is that it does contact tracing. So when there's a positive result for any performer via the database, we have a record of everyone that person worked with and who might have been exposed. And that all those people are then contacted, they're told to retest, and we can initiate that chain of like retesting and verifying who's infected, who needs to be taken out of the work pool.
Wow.
And it's really effective. It does a very good job, but it's literally, it's like, it's only as effective as people are at respecting it. So I've noticed one thing that gives me a tiny amount of worry, which is that in this age of like OnlyFans and independent content creators, I've not personally worked with, because I'm that's a boundary of mine, but I've been made aware of some OnlyFans creators. You know, there's people that I know who might have millions and millions of followers on like Instagram, and they're making money on OnlyFans, and they'll go shoot sex scenes, and they're not verifying tests of anyone. They may not be getting tested themselves. We don't know. But that's the danger of like, as much as I love that something like OnlyFans brings new people into the industry and helps destigmatize us, it's like, if you want to be a part of this, if you want to do this as a job, then you need to respect it. And part of that is participating in our testing system and abiding by the rules that we agree on. That's like one of the few things we have that we can actually hold up in front of like our government and say, look what we did. This is a good example of how we can like regulate ourselves successfully.
I have to say, the comments are popping off about this. Everyone is like, your industry is more effective than the CDC. Your industry should have been managing the state's like COVID response. I mean,
we were used, actually, the pass performer like verification system, it was used as an example of good COVID protocol and contact tracing early on. And it was easy. The thing was, it was very easy for us to adopt COVID testing and like vaccination protocols, because we've had decades of experience with testing people every 14 days.
Yeah.
And contact tracing.
Even Jasmine just said, I wondered a lot about how COVID impacted the industry. And it sounds like you luckily already had a built-in structure to deal with a transmittable virus.
Yeah, it was, I would say it didn't impact it that much overall, like in the sense that we're all used to getting tested regularly. It was a minor extra inconvenience because you have to test for COVID more frequently. Basically in the industry, it's like we have a 14-day standard for STI tests, but the standard for most studios for COVID became a 48-hour recent test. So it's like, you got to go get retested just for the one COVID part of the test every couple of days. And also it increased the cost of getting tested. Because that's the other thing is there is a performer subsidy fund run by the Free Speech Coalition, which most of that subsidy fund is funded by studios, like the really big, large, billion-dollar studios. They give a bunch of money to FSC that helps fund the subsidy, but we all pay, like as a contractor, I'm not getting reimbursed directly for my cost of testing. And it costs, if you have a COVID test included, it costs between like $170 and $190 every time you get a full panel test. So it's not cheap. Yeah.
Can you write that off as a business expense?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I too am like, as someone that has their own business, I'm always like, what can I write off?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I definitely write off my testing center visits for sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I would love to wrap up now and just say thank you so much. Okay, thanks to everyone. Thank you to the people who have stayed for a 3-hour and 10-minute class. We still have over 50 people that were listening to that. For most of the time, there were like 70 some people well into the like last, half hour. I really want to thank you, Siri, for your vulnerability. And like you said, you had no, limits as to what kind of questions that you could be asked, but you have just been like, you've shared things that I didn't even consider asking about, like managing family relationships and the boundary stuff with the consent lists. And I'm just like, so grateful for you. And I'm also grateful just for your like, as a person in the industry, you were very vocal about like sex workers' rights and about the attacks on the industry from, conservative organizations. And I like that you talk about that stuff. I know you've written about it before for the Daily Beast. So folks, you can find Siri. I mean, there are fake Siri accounts out there, but tell them what your real Instagram and Twitter are.
Yeah, so I'm officially off TikTok completely as of yesterday. No TikToks. So don't look for me on TikTok because you won't find a real one. But on Instagram and Twitter, I am the same username on both. It's the Siri Dahl, SIRIDAHL. And in my bios of those places, I have a link to like my link gatherer website where you can find all kinds of other stuff. But just
And isn't it true that you selected your name Siri before the iPhone decided
I did.
to make...
I know, it's such a weird thing, but I did. It was like I was like 3 months before the first iPhone came out.
Yep.
Weird coincidence.
It is a very weird coincidence. But thank you, everyone. I mean, if you're listening this far on the recording, thank you for that. But I am absolutely going to be sending everyone who registered for this class my big ass resource list. And that is like all the research I read for this, all the books I recommend, all of the things that you can go look at for yourself. And then I also have like how to support sex workers. These are reputable organizations for supporting sex workers. All of that is very important. And hopefully you will get plenty out of the resource list. And yeah, this was, I'm getting so many good comments in the chat. I don't know, Siri, are you reading the chat too?
Yeah, I'm getting the pop-ups every time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, everyone is very, very grateful for your education and your sharing. And yeah, I hope we made some people feel less ashamed tonight. That was my goal. That's always my goal.
Yes.
Like literally shame doesn't do anything good, you know? Like
good.
Shame is never the answer to any kind of meaningful change. Let me just end with that. Jasmine, thank you as always for being my co-host. Siri, you didn't officially meet Jasmine, but that's my bestie. But yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm so grateful. I'm so thrilled by all of this. And Siri, I'll send you a link to this whole conversation so you can always share it with people if you want.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.
Night.